All right, welcome to episode 2 of The Expert and the Idiot. We're here with Steven Kush, the ScrubShepherd himself. And I've been really enjoying your podcast, man. It's super solid stuff. I like how nerdy you guys get with all the husbandry and care and everything. And I think the last episode I listened to you, you said that you had 100 scrub pythons. Is that accurate?
It's more now that I just had a clutch hatch out.
Oh,
but yeah, 100 plus a clutch, let's say.
Wow. So how many of those are adults?
About 50 of them.
Wow.
Yeah.
Man.
I question my sanity on a daily basis.
So how did you get to that point? How did you get to 100 scrub pythons?
Well, I got my first scrub python at the March Tinley Park show in 2017. And I had an opportunity to purchase one at the October show prior, but I'd already spent all my money that weekend. And at the time, honestly, I really didn't know a whole lot about scrub pythons. I'd listened to some Morelia Python radio episodes about scrub pythons, and I was familiar with them to a little bit of a degree, but definitely hindsight being 2020, I'm glad I did not get that snake, because not acquiring that snake kind of started the obsession where between October Tinley and the following March, I was just obsessively researching scrub pythons, sitting in the back of class at school, just with my phone kind of under the desk, just like scrolling through websites and whatnot. And was able to acquire a neonate male at that show from someone locally who had gotten it a few months prior and was selling it. I still have that snake now. He has sired 3 clutches for me, and he's an amazing snake. But then, the day that I got that snake, I was, hadn't been so excited to acquire a snake in a while, and picking that snake out of the deli cup, having it in my hand, just this little red neonate. I knew I found the thing that I'd been looking for. I found what I was obsessed with. And I don't know when the next time I acquired a non-scrub python snake was. It was a while after that. I had done my research into all the different species and localities and whatnot, and was seeing what was available out there. That was right at the time where imports with scrub pythons started to decrease a bit. Where even a few years prior to that, a lot of the different types that are rare and expensive now were pretty readily available, and more than that, just weren't all that expensive because they hadn't really started gaining in their popularity yet. So it was a process of staying on top of the importers, what they were bringing in, king snake and fauna, and anywhere that scrub pythons were listed. And I was able to get my hands on a few barnecks, a couple Moluccans, some Marukis, and some Mominas, and it just kind of snowballed from there. A couple years later, I was at the Pomona Reptile show, and there were a couple adult females that were available. And at this point, I didn't have any large scrub pythons. I had experience with larger snakes like olive pythons and Burmese and stuff like that, Indian rock pythons. But there's an allure around scrub pythons that they're aggressive and they have these big strike ranges and they launch at your face and stuff like that. And, I already found out from having a small group that was almost entirely untrue. But with that being said, when your largest snake is 6 foot and now you're acquiring a 12-foot adult female, it's a bit of a jump. But I did, and I'm lucky because I have clutches now from both of those 2 females since then. It was a Barneck and a Maruki. The Barneck was my first ever clutch of scrub pythons. She laid basically like a year almost to the date after I acquired her. And then the Maruki that I acquired at that same time just laid a clutch this year, which is due fairly shortly. So that was how that started. And then about not even a year, well, actually only a few months after my first clutch hatched, I was given the opportunity to buy what was at the time probably the biggest scrub collection in the country. And over the course of 2 transactions, I had acquired that collection. And that's what kind of took me from like a moderate collection of scrub pythons that had just grown from having a clutch to the biggest collection in the country, if not probably the world, outside of Indonesia, outside of like a farm or something like that. And, you know, I've acquired animals from here and there throughout that time as well, sold some, bought some, traded some, kind of, and at the same time producing, and I've produced a few clutches since then. I think 6 now have hatched out. And I've kept a good amount of those babies. The way that I see it, the adults that I acquired, the wild caught animals, you know, those for me are the gateway to my first generation captive bred, second generation. And those are the animals that are really going to establish this project for me. And also for the whole of the, you know, captive population in the US and, you know, even further on in the world, if I have the ability to export some to Asia or Europe or wherever. And now that's where it brings me here where I am now. And I'm more or less full-time breeding scrub pythons. So
I was going to say, with that amount of animals and, you know, given their size and the level of care that they take, that has to be a full-time job, right?
More or less. I was in the rodent industry for about 5 years. And so during that time, I kind of just was using a lot of the excess money that I had, money that I made from some selling reptiles. So just continuing to build the collection, and just with no particular goal of eventually being full-time, but just the cards kind of played out that way to where I was in a situation where I could potentially look at doing this full-time. And, you know, it's been close to a year now. So not all that long, all things considered. But it's still working, and you know, I'll make it work as long as I can. And then if I ever need to course correct and go a different direction, then I will. But for now, I'm definitely I'm very fortunate to be able to do this full time and you know, try to strike some sort of a work-life balance with reptiles and anything else.
How many clutches have you produced so far with the scrubs?
So this is my 5th season breeding them. I had a clutch in 2020, which I got 11 babies from, some of which I still have now and will be breeding in the next couple of years. And then the following year, the same female laid again, but I lost the entire clutch in incubation. The following season was after I had purchased the first part of that big collection. And I had 5 clutches that year, 3 of which were good. And I got 21 babies that year from the 3 clutches. The next year was 4 clutches, and 2 of them were good. I got 18 babies out of those 2 clutches. So far, I've had 1 clutch hatch out this year, and for the sake of not jinxing myself, I'm going to not say what I have in the incubator, but I should double everything I've done before this year.
Right on. Now, how old were you back in 2020 when you produced that first clutch?
I was 19.
Oh, wow. That is, I mean, it makes it that much more impressive, right?
I guess maybe. I mean, I appreciate that.
So you're 23, 24 now, I'm assuming?
23 now. Yeah.
Wow. That's incredible. And you have the largest collection of scrub pythons in America or possibly the world.
Yeah, unless someone's hiding some crazy collection in like Japan or something, or Indonesia that I'm not aware of.
Good for you, man.
So thank you. Yeah. I it's cool to see this come full circle, because I definitely have sacrificed a lot for the sake of building this up.
Yeah. Yeah. That's incredible. that takes some brass ones. Now, what was your keeping experience leading up to the scrub pythons? What did you have prior to that, kind of going up to that point? You said it was 2017 when they caught your eye.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess 2016 when they caught my eye, and then I first acquired them in 2017. But I had started keeping when I was 9 years old. Around that time, a little bit before I had discovered the kind of the industry side of things. Just spare you the long story. I've always been reptile obsessed. And,
no, get into it. Give me the long story. I want to hear it because it's interesting as hell. Because I know what led me into it. I know I still have the memories from when I was a kid. So for some reason, I connect with that. I love hearing what got people into it.
Sure. Yeah. I'll go through the whole thing. So, before I could remember, I was, Steve Irwin obsessed on the TV. That was like the first thing that kind of caught my eye when I was, a little tiny kid. And, to the point where I would with my dad in our apartment, I would dress up as Steve Irwin, and we had these like rubber alligators, and we would tie them up and transport them to the other end of the apartment and let them out into the other pond. So I guess there was some foreshadowing from pretty early on. For anyone who had been to a Tinley Park show before, I think 2018 or 2019, there was the Bubba the alligator, the big tame alligator that sat at the front of the show. My parents got Bubba's predecessor, original Bubba, to do my 4th birthday party, and it was Jim Nessie from it's Cold Blooded something. I can't remember. I have no idea why I can't remember that, but he used to be in Chicago. Now he's down in Florida, and he would do educational shows and parties all over the Chicago area, and so it was the big alligator was the showstopper, but then there were tortoises, Burmese pythons, all the classic kind of animals that are used for this type of programs, and that was just how hooked I was from early on. So I had just kind of a few serendipitous moments throughout my life that kind of just led from one step to the next in this. The next one was that my pediatrician growing up was actually a very active member of the Chicago Herpetological Society. And he was the main guy in charge of promoting Reptile Fest, which is their educational expo they do every year. So imagine any sort of reptile expo, but only educational, so no sales, but same kind of displays, same table orientation. It was at the gymnasium at the University of Illinois Chicago campus, so it was decent size. There were probably a couple hundred tables there, and I was 6 years old the first time I went to that. Some of my friends running around, holding snakes, petting iguanas, tortoises, all of that stuff. So from there on out, it was pretty clear, I think, to my parents that he's going to want pet reptiles at some point. Let's try to push that as far into the future as possible. Where the eventual bargain that I came to was when I was 10 years old, I could start getting them. And then my mom folded, and I got my first snake when I was 9.
What was it?
It was a ball python, a pastel ball python.
Nice.
Because my initial kind of resources online and whatnot when I first got into it was YouTube, and Snake Bites TV was the big one back then. Sure. I watched all the different people, early Justin Kabelka videos, Jeremy Stone, Ralph Davis, all those guys who were making YouTube content back then. But Snake Bites was a weekly religious experience for me. So that was what I thought was this was the dream. This is what we do, to have a big production facility and, getting all into the morphs of ball pythons. I was, making spreadsheets and little business plans and stuff like that about breeding ball pythons. And I'd always had interest in other species from that point. It was more not being confident that I had the experience to have a larger snake or a snake that might be more aggressive, and then also convincing my parents of it. I also was into dart frogs when I was first getting into it. There was a Reptiles magazine article about thumbnail dart frogs that really caught my eye, and started getting into some of the larger species. That phased out eventually, but that was really fun. I was, building vivariums for them and stuff like that. The next moment that kind of elevated what I was doing was in 8th grade. All the kids had to do like an internship somewhere for a week before graduation, be that any business, and some real world thing. And I wanted to be involved with reptiles. So at Reptile Fest that year in Chicago, I was trying to figure out something to do for that week involving reptiles. And one thing led to the next, and I got introduced to Rob Carmichael, who ran the Wildlife Discovery Center out of Lake Forest, Illinois, which is about an hour north of Chicago. And got all set up to do like my week-long internship there. I had never been to the place before. They didn't have much of an online presence, so I had a kind of rudimentary idea of what I was getting into. So I show up for my first day. I walk into the first room, and there's like a saltwater crocodile, a dwarf caiman, a big water monitor, an adult olive python, and I'm like, where am I? This is incredible. And then we walk over to the next room, which is where the venomous snakes were. And on my right, a full-grown adult bushmaster, a cage full of timber rattlesnakes, big eastern diamondback, big gaboon, green mamba, Mangshan viper, multiple king cobras. I'm like, where's this place been all my life?
Yeah.
And I get to work here now. So what I was like doing tours for people and stuff like that, and helping out with some care stuff. And I was kind of book smart on reptiles at that point, just from nerding out and researching. And in terms of this, I've always kind of naturally came to like public speaking kind of easily. So like I was good at giving tours to people and stuff like that. And after that week, they were like, do you want to stick around and come back for the summer? And for me, I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. And they're like, hey, this kid will do this for free. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I just kind of stuck around. And once I turned 16, I was on the payroll there. And I worked there from like the end of 8th grade until the end of high school. And, during that time, I got experience with so many incredible species, like olive pythons, green tree pythons, Indian pythons, a few different monitor species, some like Dominican red mountain boas and sailfin dragons, dipped my toe in the water with some crocodilians for the first time. And then the one that I loved the most was the bobcat they had there. We had developed quite a little bond, the two of us.
That's awesome. Was it in a cage, or was it?
Yeah. It was this really, really large enclosure that they had for it out there. He was awesome. He was a real character. So that was Birds of Prey. It was an amazing place. Unfortunately, it shut down a little over a year ago. But yeah, that was pivotal for me. And that was what gave me the confidence, and also subsequently my parents, that I could branch out into some other stuff. The one that I was really obsessed with at the time, even before working there, were green tree pythons. But because of their reputation, and they're supposed to have bigger teeth, yada yada, my mom was like particularly hesitant about me getting into green tree pythons. But then, was able to show her through my work there. There were two that they had just gotten in shortly after I started working there, that I was always handling and taking care of and stuff like that. I still remember those snakes. They were incredible. They were Maruki locality with the like white stripe down their back and a little bit of blue on the ventral. It was incredible. So I got my first green tree python when I was a freshman in high school. Ended up breeding them when I was 18. And then, then around then is when I found Morelia Python Radio. And that just like blew the whole thing wide open. I got into carpet pythons, white lip pythons, Timor pythons, Papuan pythons, the whole litany.
Can we talk about Timors for a minute? You want to expand on
Sure.
that? I
Yeah.
love Timors. I have 3 of them. I've
Okay.
got a reverse trio, all Ryan
Cool.
Young's animals. So
Oh, very nice.
if anybody wants to talk Timors, I'm down for it. So I'd love to hear about your experience with them.
I love Timors. I mean, they're beautiful snakes. They're one of those like medium to large size pythons that are, you have a little bit more than a carpet python there, but not quite even like a scrub python or Burmese or a retic.
Yeah.
They I had some that were like perfect, uh, calm, didn't mind being worked with, and then some that were just awful. Just you get showered every time you look at that thing.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely a mixed experience with Timor pythons. They're great. I don't have any now, and I don't think I probably will again. But that's, and mostly just because I'm so heavy focused on the scrub pythons now. But I really hope that more breeding happens with those in captivity. And I just hope there is more awareness. I feel like there was a time where their kind of stock was rising, and then it kind of plateaued a little bit. But I mean, there's so much potential for line breeding with Timor pythons, or even figuring out why they all are so variable. Yeah, they're badass snakes. I really do like Timor pythons.
Did you reproduce them while you had them?
No, I didn't. I never got to that point.
Yeah.
I ended up losing my first female that I got just very spontaneously, and eventually ended up trading away my male for a scrub python that I still have now. So I never quite got to that point, but it was always kind of hovering around there, and then step back, and then change of direction. But
how did you keep your Timor pythons?
Pretty simply, just like any other python.
Okay.
Like pretty, big tub setups. I like to keep them in tubs because of how visually sensitive they are. Same with white lip pythons. I had white lips in cages, and they didn't do well. They were always really upset, and then I put them in tubs, and they calmed down pretty well. Not that you can't keep Timors in cages. I never did. But just typical like ambient python temperatures, 78 to 82, and pretty straightforward the way that I keep a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I've got my 22 male up in this cage right here, and he seems to do all right. But if I were to put the 23s in a cage that size, it doesn't go well.
Sure, and what I will say though is I'd only ever encountered one captive bred Timor. The rest were all wild caught. So I'd have to imagine that makes a good bit of a difference too.
I don't know because I've never experienced a wild caught, but they have not defecated on me in probably 2 months or so.
Nice.
And I haven't had them that long. I think I got the first one back in early March, late February.
Okay.
And yeah, they're so far so good. But I handle them every week too, so I'm putting a lot of time and effort into them.
That'll definitely make a big difference. Yeah, one of mine were good is when I was still living at home in Chicago, and I had time, and I was able to work at them a bit more. But then once I moved out and got a lot busier and started doing rodent stuff, then that's when they kind of went downhill a little bit when I didn't have that time to spend with them anymore.
Yeah. So you had white lips, Timors. What happened to your ball python? Did you keep it? Do you still have it? Is it sitting in your lap right now?
So that first one actually, he wasn't really right from the start. I got him from pets. I lost him a few months later. The second ball python that I got, though, I still have. I only have 3 ball pythons now, but they were the first 3 that I got, and they will be with me forever. So
nice, good for you.
Yeah, and now it's like, let's see how old I can, get these guys. Can I have like some 50-year-old ball pythons? And
are you reproducing them or just keeping them as pets?
No, just keeping them as pets. It's 2 males and a female, and the female laid like 3 clutches for me over the years, so I'm good just keeping them around as pets.
Right on. So Timors are out now. Do you still keep the white lips?
I have one white-lipped python. I have my male southern white-lipped python still. I might pair him up eventually. I might not. It's just a snake I've had for so long that I'm like, what's the point of letting the snake go? I've had him for 8 years or so. So
How's his personality?
it's pretty good. You can catch him on an off day for sure, but I've never been bitten by the snake. They'll definitely show you when they're not having it. They're not like Woma pythons where they'll like sneaky get you. They're pretty clear about it. But what I found with white lips is when you are interacting with them and you need to remove them from the enclosure, just get them as quickly as you can. If they get a chance to like double back and run, then that's when you're gonna run into issues. The Timor pythons were the same way too. If they were sitting under the hide, I'd like crack the hide and like slide my hand under and just pull the snake up like that.
Yeah, once they run, it's not good. Then all of a sudden they think you're going to kill them.
Exactly. That's when you get sprayed.
Yeah, it's kind of sad. Mine, and mine they're only doing the spray when they're in shed. That's what I've noticed.
Yeah.
And then it's understandable. It's like, you can't see me, and they experience it more than like, my boas, they'll just act totally normal. The Timors, once they go opaque, it's like, just leave me alone. Do not come near me. Don't try to feed me. Don't do anything, because they're not having any of it.
Yeah, for sure.
What about lizards? Did you have any lizards?
Yeah, I did. So the first thing I really bred heavily was leopard geckos. I had a bunch of leopard geckos for a while, and some other. I had a couple African fat tails for a while. Some of the Nephurus species, the Australian geckos, some cave geckos, Yucatan banded gecko for a while. So that was like the first thing, and I was into monitors for a while. After meeting Forrest Fanning when I was in high school, he was getting into monitors around the same time that I was kind of doing that. So like we would kind of bounce back and forth on, ideas and stuff with monitors. And I got some Ackies and a peach throat monitor when I lived in Chicago. And then when I moved down to Indianapolis to work with him, that's when the monitor thing kind of exploded. And I was working with tree monitors and croc monitors and stuff like that.
Wow.
Over the years, I've been able to work with like most of the species of monitors that are around in the U.S. hobby. I don't have any anymore. And it's kind of nice because they're a lot of work. But I will say it was awesome, lace monitors and blue tail monitors and, water monitors, torch monitors, bunch of shit.
Where were you keeping those?
This is all in Indianapolis at the Cold-Blooded Cafe.
Okay. So you had a decent amount of space for them there.
Oh yeah. It was a big facility where the rodents took up a good portion of it, and then there was the reptile section, which we packed a lot of stuff into. What
do you think of croc monitors?
There's nothing like them. The only thing you can really compare to is the Komodo, and but they're such different animals. They're always thinking, they're always processing what's going on, and they know that they can fuck you up at any point in time. There's no fear. A fresh wild caught animal will be fearful, but anything that's been either like a captive hatched or one that's been around for a while, they know what they're capable of, and then they know what you're not capable of. With that said, though, luckily I never had any incidents with them. I was always just pretty cautious. But yeah, they were fun. That's like those and the lace monitors would be the ones that if I kept monitors again, it would be one of those two species for sure.
What about black dragons?
I like them. Water monitors never really did it for me that much, just because I feel like everything that I liked about water monitors, there was a different species that took that to like the next level of how cool it was. The black dragons that I'd been around were all little dickheads, but
really,
there wasn't a lot of work put into them either. So, but I was never like I'm gonna socialize my monitor guy. And not because I don't agree with it. I just never really had time or the will to. The focus was always a little bit more on breeding than it was on socialization for me, at least. But I mean, I like water monitors. I think they're bred way too much in captivity. they're basically they're the mainland retic of the lizard world. Um, but I do like that a lot of people are working with kind of the dwarf species like the Simbawas and stuff like that. I think it's akin to the super dwarf retic trend. Try to take these lizards that a lot of people like and just put them in a more manageable size that people can actually accommodate for properly. So I'm a fan of that work that's going on.
Yeah, I'm in Florida, so I've been toying with the idea of getting a monitor. I'm really drawn to the black dragons because I think that they look so cool, and for me, it's easy to keep them in a 4x2x2 for a little while and then move them outside. And
Right. Yeah. That's. I'd worked with monitors outside a little bit, and it is so cool. It's so awesome to be able to do that. Unfortunately, up in the Midwest, the window for them to be outside is like 3 months, maybe 4 if you have a warm year. So that never really went like full circle. But now that I'm here in Texas, that's definitely something that I could do in the future.
Oh, okay, you're in Texas now?
Yep.
Nice.
Yep.
So that's cool. So how are I saw that on your available list that you had quite a few venomous. When did that start? And what's the legality there being in Texas?
It's one of the main reasons why I moved to Texas. I'd been around venomous from the time I was 13 years old at the Wildlife Discovery Center. I didn't get any hands-on experience there, mostly because I was just too young, and they were a city organization. There's a lot of red tape and whatnot. But I was able to see how my boss would work with them, his protocols and stuff like that, familiarize myself with that. I had a few opportunities to do a little bit of training with some friends in Florida, which was great. And then I just decided to take the jump in 2021. It's when I got my first rattlesnake. And I knew that I was just going to fully go as deep as I could into it. I have a similar number of venomous snakes that I do scrub pythons.
Wow.
They're just they're very small. Most of them are rattlesnakes that are no more than 2 feet long. The only snakes I have that really are larger on the venomous side are my Mangshan vipers, and they're about 6 to 7 feet. I have 2 adult pairs and a juvenile pair, but it's mostly a bunch of little rattlesnakes, and I love them. It's cool to have a project that is physiologically so different from the scrub pythons. These long, slender, semi-arboreal pythons, and then these tiny little compressed rattlesnakes that look like they were painted. And the same with the scrub pythons. There's many different species that all come from a relatively similar area, a lot of different locality variation. That stuff always kind of keeps my attention. And that's part of why I moved out here too, because I'm in rock rattlesnake country. I could go 15 minutes from my house and herp some. So it's really cool to work with something that you can actually go to its environment and, camping out in the mountains, feeling how cold it really gets at night, knowing that where these snakes are, they're even higher up because we're hiking up from where camp is to find these snakes. Gives you a better appreciation of what they deal with. And I think it's a lot easier to apply that to the captive setting than just reading a care sheet or asking someone how they take care of oh, I do this, this, and this. It's okay, this is why though, because I'm here. This is the time of morning I found them. This is the temperature of the rock. This is only available for a certain amount of time though, and they're only going to bask for a couple of hours because then it gets too hot and they're going to retreat, yada, yada, yada. So, that's part of why I'm fascinated with them, because I've been able to experience them in the wild. But yeah, so I got my first one then, and it cascaded very, very quickly. But part of my reasoning of moving to Texas was for the venomous laws. Statewide, it's pretty lax. The permit for keeping venomous snakes is basically a fishing or hunting license. And there are certain jurisdictions certain, like Austin, for instance, like if you're in city proper of Austin, you can't keep venomous snakes. They're different, they're counties and stuff like that that have particular laws, but statewide, Texas is fairly wide open. Indiana had a solid system. Illinois, if you're not Lincoln Park Zoo or Brookfield Zoo, you don't have venomous snakes. But Indiana had a solid system. The only thing that I didn't like about it, and really just for my case, was that you needed a permit for each animal. So if you have 5 venomous snakes, no big deal. If you have 100 venomous snakes, that's a lot of paperwork. And with a yearly vet assessment, and there aren't many vets who are willing to come do house calls, I've learned these days. So that was a pain in the ass as well. So,
especially on rattlesnakes.
Yeah, they're like, oh, you can bring them all in clear enclosures and clear containers, and we'll do an observation through it. It's like, oh yeah, cool. Let me just put my body at risk 100 times over just to transport these snakes and stress them out, and for you to say they look okay.
Yeah,
that doesn't sound like it's good for anybody. So I'm definitely glad I don't have to deal with that process anymore. But with that said, it could be a lot worse, because there are states where you're screwed no matter what. You're not keeping venomous snakes. So I guess I'll give credit to Indiana for having a system, and an easier, more accessible system too. It's not like Florida where you need the 500 hours per family, which is just, I mean,
it ends up being thousands of hours. It's
insane. And for someone like me, so like when I was younger, I always thought Florida was the place to be, for all the obvious reasons. Right now, if I moved to Florida, I could take like 40 of my snakes. They're like all illegal in Florida.
Yeah.
So like, okay, well, not going to Florida. And like I'm a fairly experienced at this point venomous keeper. What am I gonna go train for 1,500 hours? Or I guess I would only need 1,000 of them for vipers and then for rear fang. But to keep the snakes that I already keep here,
yeah,
no.
I keep toying with the idea of leaving the state, just because I do want to retic, and there's animals. I mean, we talked about that the other day. The scrub pythons. I think that there's only one I can get, right?
There's 3, but
there's 3.
So 2 of the 5 species are banned in Florida, which is hilarious considering that one of them, the Australian scrub, there are 2 in the entire country, and they're at a zoo. So good job, Florida lawmakers, tax dollars to good use.
Yeah.
Same with like South African rock pythons don't exist in captivity in the world, but you banned them. Congratulations. Yeah. You did so good. Anyway, but see the thing
go on. I love hearing how dumb Florida is. I mean, it's infuriating that the retics, you can't have one. There's no established populations out in the wild.
I mean, I've never even heard of an account of a scrub python in the wild in Florida. I did like a little interview for USARK Florida at the Schaumburg Reptile Show last year, talking about scrub pythons and why I disagree with the legislation. I'm like, show me one account ever of a scrub python that's been found in the wild. It just fits a physical description. That's it. Mm-hmm. Like, that's the only reason why you could potentially figure to ban them. And I don't know, it really comes down to how ridiculous it is that like there's even legislation like above the Everglades. These snakes have been in the wild the Burmese have been for like over 40 years now. Mm-hmm. If they were going to move north, they would have.
Yeah,
they have to move north. Find me a Burmese python sighting in Orlando, even. Like
my concern is that this winter was hot as hell. It was rainy and warmer than usual, and we got no frost. So I think that we are going to see more stuff start pushing northward if that continues. Potentially, I mean, you still get the iguanas are falling out of the trees and freezing to death down in Miami, so it's, it's
Yeah.
a toss up. You know, if we get a few warm winters, things might push north, but then you get a freeze and you're probably going to lose most of it.
Right. So it's, it's hard to say. And obviously I don't have the climate graphs of Florida for the last 40 years off the top of my head, but I don't know. Just, I feel like,
But you are right. Yeah. There's no Burmese pythons where I'm at.
I mean, yeah, like it would have happened a long time ago, but either way, the thing that scares me the most about Florida from the prospect of living there, what would they ban next?
Mm-hmm.
Like let's even say before scrub pythons were banned, if I moved there, I was like, all right, I'll sell off my venomous collection. Fine. I need to keep my scrub pythons. And then 6 months later, they're like, oh, hey, they're banned now. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
And Australian scrubs are banned, and then Somalia amethystina, which are the Barnecks, Marukis, the Highlands, kind of the mainland. There are a couple island forms that currently fall into it, but anyway, the larger species, kind of, because Moluccans get the same size, but they're banned. So that gives you the Moluccan scrubs, the Tannenbars, and the Halmaheras that are all good in Florida. But for how long?
Yeah.
I don't even think that these lawmakers probably even know what these snakes are. So I think the chance of them being banned is probably pretty low. But I don't know. The whole tegu iguana thing. They go after whatever they can because we're an easy target.
Yeah.
And land developers want this legislation on their side so that, I don't know, people are more prone to go into these new neighborhoods they're developed. I don't know, but
people are absolutely bloodthirsty for reptiles too, because we have a lot of an older population and they're terrified of all reptiles. And just in my neighborhood the other day, there was a video taken of an Asian water monitor walking through somebody's yard. Looked pretty big, more than likely it's an escaped pet. They don't care though. They see that, and in that Facebook post, it's, I want that dead. I want to shoot that. The 45 will take care of that. It's all just bloodshed. Meanwhile, if it was a feral cat pushing a bird species to extinction, and I know this is a tired argument, but if it was that, nobody bats an eye. Nobody looks at the cat or the dog like that. And I don't want them to. But my whole point is, you don't have to look at the monitor and say, we have to kill that. It should be, we should try to get that home because it more than likely belongs to somebody.
Right. Florida is just such a mess as far as it has the highest concentration of invasive species of any type in the world. Like, that's not good, so I don't know. It sucks because I love Florida and I have family in Florida, and it would have been cool, but unfortunately no longer in the cards for me. But Texas is pretty great too, so I'm not too upset about Texas. And considering what Texas is known for as far as their mindset on things, I'm not all that worried about sweeping legislation in Texas. So
yeah, it's strange because the legislating reptiles, it does seem like a bipartisan thing where both sides agree, where it's just like, yeah, screw those snakes.
Yeah. The only thing that we have on our side is any kind of like pro small business politicians. They're not pro reptile by any mean, but just pro freedom of the ability for someone to run a small business. That's why boa constrictors weren't banned in Florida. Is that the U.S. ARC and U.S. ARC Florida, if they were around at the time, just lobby that, hey, you're putting lots of people out of work, and people who employ a number of people. I'm not sure why the same claim wouldn't have worked for reticulated pythons, but it may have been to say we'll take what we can get situation where it's easier to make a case for a 7-foot boa constrictor than a 16-foot reticulated python.
Sure.
But so that's like a little bit of a positive that the boa constrictors weren't banned on the account of the economic impact that it would have on small businesses and employees of small businesses. But yeah, it's a scary one. I think we've been insulated by the geopolitical issues of the world. You know, with the war in Ukraine and Gaza and all that. I don't think lawmakers are really too worried about reptiles on a national level right now. Because like after Biden came into office, there was this very strategic attack from animal rights. It was like boom, 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 national bill, state bill, state bill, state bill, all at the beginning of 2021. Where during the 4 years prior, there was really no reptile legislation. We all kind of were able to breathe for a second. So it felt very intentional. They kind of waited for their time, and then they struck. I mean, luckily nothing stuck on a national level. Your guy's boy Marco Rubio down there, he's pretty anti-reptile industry. So that doesn't bode well for Florida in particular. But
yeah, and DeSantis just he applauds the python hunts, and they celebrate it, and it's a kind of a culture thing,
Yeah.
it's this just people love killing reptiles, by any means necessary.
The unfortunate part is it's kind of necessary for the pythons. That doesn't solve the issues of the other invasive species, but I think we'd be lying to ourselves if we said that the Burmese pythons aren't a massive issue. But the only thing that I'll say, and the argument I've always had, is if it was such a massive issue, why did you wait 30 years to address it?
Yeah.
This was a problem in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s. Why did you wait until 2012 to address the problem? It's
clickbait that you can run on.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, this is not an ecological issue. It's a political issue. It's real estate development. It's this is not about animals to these politicians, unfortunately, and that's what we're fighting. We're fighting against interest groups and lobbyists that have far more money than the entire GDP of the reptile industry. So.
Yeah. And for me, it's more the way that it's presented. If it's something may be necessary, right? It might be necessary to go in and hunt the pythons, and that can't be really debated.
Yeah.
But it's the show that they put on with it, the song and dance, the celebration of killing the animals.
Yeah. Yeah.
You wouldn't do that with cats. It's not. You wouldn't do that with stray dogs.
Really, it's awesome.
I've seen that, but again, there's a professionalism to it.
Yeah,
it's not this redneck, put on your cowboy boots and your hat and let's get out there, sick the dog on the snake, let it tear it apart, and then let's celebrate with the corpse. It's a different thing. It's a parade of death instead of a professional thing that needs to be done.
It's the Florida man doing Florida man things.
Exactly. Yeah, that's how we sell it.
Yeah.
So you didn't have any venomous outside of Texas? Is that something that you really got into once you moved to Texas?
No, I started in Indiana.
Okay.
Yeah. So I just moved here in October. So
wow.
For a year yet.
Wow.
Yep.
Nice. Now, did your collection grow exponentially when you got to Texas?
No, it actually, I've been trying to intentionally shrink it. I definitely have been through the different stages of collection size and workload, and between my collection and Forrest's collection, at one point I was taking care of over 500 animals every week, and
wow.
I was miserable, and I didn't enjoy a second of it. I was just punching the clock with something that I'm supposed to love, it's supposed to be like my life's passion. So now I have like around 250 snakes, and still a lot. I'd like to see that number under 200 and just to see how life is at that point. But it's hard when I have so many snakes that I like so much. So, but no, I think I've experienced the have a huge collection phase, and I know it's not for me. So I want to find what that happy medium is. Because also the thing is, as a lot of people will find out who go through this, having more animals does not mean you produce more animals. I'll have one of my best years this year with a collection that's like half the size of what I've had at certain points. So and that also comes with just getting better at this over the years and learning how to do it more. But what I will say is having more time to observe individual animals and to be really specific about cycling and feeding and whatnot. It all pays off. And there is a point, because I don't have anyone helping me with it, with my snakes and all that. So if it's just me, I only have so much brain power to put towards it, and so many hours. So I hope I can hit that happy medium one day where like I have this collection, I can maintain it perfectly, and I can breed as much of it as possible. And then there's less overhead, there's all this other shit. So I think a more moderate size collection is kind of what I'm going for in the long run.
So what really gets you excited outside of scrubs right now? The venomous?
Yeah, the venomous, and then my colubrids, my tiger rat snakes and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, the scrub pythons take up a majority of kind of my mental bandwidth. And that's like most of what I talk about on my podcast, and what people really know me for. But and there's so much there. There's so much for me to always be thinking about, and pairings that I want to make. And this one that I've been raising up that I produced a couple years ago, it shed, and now it looks like this, and now I know this is the right male for this female that I have growing up. All that good stuff. But yeah, the venomous for sure, and then my colubrid projects excite me as well.
Nice. Any lizards anymore, or did you get rid of all the lizards?
No, I don't have any lizards anymore. It's only snakes right now for me.
Right on. Are any cobras or anything crazy like that?
No.
Any plans?
Hell no.
No.
I've been around it. I mean, I'm just lucky that the venomous snakes that I'm fascinated with happen to be small vipers that have low metabolism and brumate for 5 months of the year, and you keep them in a cold room. They're really easy if you set them up right. You got to get the setup right, but if you get the setup right, then they're low maintenance. The amount of time it takes for me to take care of my rattlesnakes compared to my scrub pythons every week, I spend like 5 times as many hours on the scrub pythons for the same number of animals, which is just not a complaint. It just is what it is. But yeah, I don't know. The elapids, they've never interested me to the point where I wanted to keep them privately.
Yeah.
I think they're amazing for educational displays, for like zoo type exhibits. Of all the elapids, king cobras are head and shoulders my favorite. I love king cobras. I've been able to interact with a couple king cobras, and they're everything that they're made out to be. Probably the most intelligent snake in the world, and they command every last bit of your respect. So they're special. But yeah, no, I'm good on the elapid front, and even on anything viper wise that's larger. No bushmasters in my future. No giant rattlesnakes in my future. The Mengshans are, for me, that's like the larger species, and I'm good after that.
Are you into any boas?
No, not really. I've kept a handful of different boas over the years. I bred annulated tree boas. I had emeralds, basins, Sanzinia. I've worked with a couple different locality boas over time. The only boas that I would keep, eventually I want to get like a pair of Amazon basin emeralds and do a big display cage and have them in there. And but that'd really be about it. And I don't really know why. They've just never fully grabbed my attention the way that the pythons have.
Yeah. I'm 50-50 split. I love boas. I love pythons. They are such different animals, though. It's easy to go back and forth, and
very different. The thing that really for me, made me reconsider boas was when I learned about IBD and how it just annihilates pythons. That these boas can live with IBD dormant even to the point where it will come back negative on a PCR test, and eventually that stressor happens, that immune system suppression, that virus comes out. You don't know, spreads to your pythons, and they're all dead in 2 weeks. I'm like, not worth it for snakes that I don't like as much as my pythons.
Why you got to do this to me, Kush? You just turned on my OCD and anxiety so hard, because that is my biggest fear, is the IBD.
Honestly, I think the way to do it, if you want to be a boa and python keeper, is probably just have separate rooms, a boa room, a python room, and you never work that boa room before you work your python room. That's yeah. And when I have had boas, that's always been how I've done it, is just all the pythons get done first, fed first, everything first before the boas, and then any tools that I'm using for the boas get cleaned afterward. So, and you know, I think that the way that I stated that there is probably a little bit of like a worst case scenario, dramatic, but it still is possible. And I know a lot of boa breeders have done lots of work over the years to have clean collections. So I'm not saying that boas are dirty. It is just a concern of mine that I've had for a long time. Same way with nidovirus with pythons, when that was really becoming prominent around like 2016, 2017. That's when I started straying away from carpets and green tree pythons. And all pythons can get nidovirus. But those were the two main groups of species that were getting hit hard and were transmitting. So now nidovirus, honestly, I don't even think is a really big consideration, especially if you know how to manage the virus and how it transmits and yada yada. Testing is incredibly easy and pretty inexpensive these days. So nidovirus to me isn't much of a concern anymore, just because I know how to manage it. And viruses like IBD are a lot scarier because of how they transmit, how they lay dormant the way they do, and just how destructive they are. Because you can have pythons with nidovirus that could live 30 years and you'd never know. It's just not that strong of a virus. Just when certain strains hit species that they're not familiar with, like if carpet python nidovirus gets into a green tree python collection, and green tree pythons are already very sensitive to that virus, that's where the issues come about. I mean, I'm very lucky with the scrub pythons. I've probably tested over 50 scrub pythons for nidovirus, and I've never gotten a positive result. So
nice.
They seem to be pretty resilient as far as that, like the viruses and stuff go.
How many of your scrubs are captive bred and, versus long-term captive?
I would say at this point about half are captive bred, because I've purchased some captive bred, and then I've kept a majority of the ones that I've produced. I've lost some older adults over time that after breeding and stuff like that, and I've sold off animals. And so, from a collection that was entirely wild caught, slowly over time, just transitioning it to be more higher percentage captive bred. And for me, primarily, I want them to be the ones that I produced. Yeah.
Right on. Who is this in this cage that I can see, like right at your ear?
That is actually one of the most special snakes in my collection. That's my male Key Island scrub python.
Oh, wow.
He is one of a few in the country and in the world in known captivity. That's, I would say, of the scrub python localities we know of, because there are definitely some that we are completely unaware of, that's the rarest locality.
Have you done any herping for scrubs yet?
I have not. I've only been out of the country once, and that was a long time ago. But that's definitely something that I would love to do eventually, just whenever life is a little bit more set up for it. And honestly, part of having a smaller collection is to be able to do stuff like that. Where I can leave for 2 weeks and have somebody watching it with minimal instructions on, just stuff to get by. So that, a trip like that could actually be a possibility.
Yeah, that would be incredible. Being able to get out and see something that you're so passionate about out in the wild.
Yeah. What I would love to be able to do is like to go out and, have permits to collect like a couple snakes and have like exact coordinate points. There's a lot of debate about locality types with scrub pythons. So I'd love to, have a pair that I, collected a quarter mile from each other and be like, this is exactly where they come from. So I know for sure that this is like a pure locality type pairing.
It seems like the localities it's like the big thing now, it's kind of shadowing the morphs in more and more things I've noticed, and I noticed that in my own, I just recently got back into snakes after being out of it for a while after my second kid came, and just coming back into it. At first I was like, yeah, let me check out this ball python, let me look at this, and I got a boa with some morphs and everything, and now I'm looking at the Argentine boas are really interesting to me, and the Timor pythons, and I've got Papuan carpet, so I'm getting more into and appreciating more just how these things look out in the wild. I
think that's just a natural evolution for most keepers. I was heavy into the morphs when I first got into all of it. Ball python morphs. I was researching boa morphs, carpet python morphs, corn snakes, and then like designer green tree python lineages and stuff like that. But yeah, I think I'm definitely with the rattlesnakes and stuff. It's all this little species that comes from this small range, and then these 2 locality types from within that species. And I have like 10 different localities of banded rock rattlesnakes.
Wow.
So yeah, to me, it's just more exciting. And then with the scrub pythons, like there have been morph scrub pythons that have popped up. There are 2 that are in a collection in South Korea. I have a couple that could be a morph. One that I actually produced last year that kind of looks like a ghostly. That's super fun to me. Like I'm not opposed to it. There've been a couple like ivory or leucistic type animals that have popped up in Papua recently. But to me, none of them beat the actual look of the wild caught one, and or not even just the wild type. And I think the amount of line breeding that's possible within some of these different looks is completely endless. That's what really excites me. Like a morph would be awesome. And what I think morphs do is they bring new eyes to them, because unfortunately, for better or worse, be it ball pythons, reticulated pythons, water monitors, corn snakes, geckos, a lot of the biggest markets are predicated on morphs. Mm-hmm. And that's where a majority of the industry exists, is within those markets. So to me, if like a morph can bring eyes to scrub pythons, but then can be shown, well, this is what all these different localities are like. And, I'm breeding these ones that are high contrast with a gold base color because I want to get to this look. I just think that would be a better way to, it's more sustainable for the hobby. And I think just more enjoyable too. But if you don't know about it, how are you going to ever come to that conclusion to begin with?
Yeah. It's something that is much easier to appreciate once you've been in it compared to the morphs. What do you think is drawing that morph, the attention towards the morphs?
I think to look at it from like a positive standpoint, it's just that they're so cool. It's like art. It's very eye catching. Like take for instance a ball python. Most people who don't know about reptiles will see a normal, like a wild type ball python and be like, oh, snake. But then you see like a orange dream pied something, and you're like, what is that?
Nose clown.
Yeah. You're like, holy shit, what is that? That's a snake?
Yeah.
It's like a dessert.
Yeah.
So they're beautiful. Don't get me wrong. I'm not talking down to morphs, but I think on the like most positive end of the spectrum, it's that, and then on the most like kind of you don't want to think about it this way end of the spectrum, it's that the lot of the leaders in the industry, their pitch is not, I love these snakes because they're so much fun to have, they make great pets, I love that I can set them up this way and then I can see these natural behaviors. It's this snake, make more snakes, money.
Yeah.
big house, yacht, Porsches. Like, okay, cool. Congratulations. But
Yeah.
what about the animals? Freedom breeder racks as far as the eye can see, but the snakes can't see anything because they're in solid color tubs.
Yeah. And then what is it for? It's not for a pet keeper. It's not for a keeper at all. It's literally breeding to produce things, to breed more, to supply breeders.
Yeah, which, like, this is the basis of our industry. This is what we run off of. Without ball pythons and leopard geckos and crested geckos, we wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
So you can't hate on it too much, because it's the substrate from which our industry can grow. But with that said, there's a lot of reasons why that's not the path that I pursued. And I just didn't really find too much fulfillment in making the next morph. And then, not like I'm doing anything that different with scrub pythons. They're just not genetic morphs. They're just, I'm taking this look and this look. But there aren't that many. It's not like there are hundreds of thousands of scrub pythons being produced every year. There's, on a good year, 100 in the country being produced. And more people are breeding them these days, which is great. There's a lot more attention being brought to them. The more serious keepers and breeders there are, just it'll seem, more people will see it as a viable sector of the industry. So I'm all for that. That's definitely something that I think is very valuable. But to me, some of these the morph stuff in the common species, it just doesn't really excite me anymore. If I had a shed full of 100 ball pythons in my backyard, I don't think I would be like as excited to go check on whatever every morning as I am with like my scrub pythons. And not that there's anything wrong with being that excited about ball pythons. That's just not where I am. And I had my time when I was really interested in ball pythons, and then my interest went elsewhere because I was exposed to things that I thought were more interesting. So
it seems like there's something for everybody. There's more than enough for everybody, and scrub pythons probably aren't for everybody, and that kind of brings me into my next question is which scrub python would be the best pet scrub python in your opinion?
That's a good question, because there's a lot of different factors that go into answering that question. I would say on top of anything else, like a captive bred one. I will say though, as far as snake species go, wild caught scrub pythons do establish pretty well most of the time. But with that said, there are complications that come with it. And some of those snakes don't always have the best demeanors. Most of them are workable. But I wouldn't, let some of them crawl around my neck and my head the way I let some of my captive bred ones do that I've raised. So there's that side of it. And then there's the size part of it too, because not everyone can accommodate a 10-foot adult snake. Even though 10 foot of scrub python and 10 foot of Burmese python are very, very different animals. Scrub pythons they're kind of weightless. They hold on to you very well, and they balance themselves. So they're very light bodied snakes. But a 10-foot snake is still a 10-foot snake, no matter how you look at it. The Tannenbar scrub pythons are the smallest species of scrub python, where a typical adult is like 6 feet or so. And that's one of the legal species in Florida. In my so far kind of limited experience with them, I've only been keeping them for a couple of years because I didn't have the ability to acquire any prior to that. They're the most skittish of the scrub pythons. But then I also have wild caught animals. I've never had a captive bred Tannenbar scrubs. So that could also be eliminated in the first generation. Actually, this week on my podcast, I interviewed Eric Hernandez as at this point, the only person who's breeding Tannenbar scrubs in the U.S. So with that said, availability is a problem. There are not lots, but proportionally lots of like Maruki scrub pythons that are produced in the country every year. I think last year there were like 4 or 5 clutches in the States. Between me and Rob Christian, Andrew Acevedo, and this year a couple other people potentially, Barneck scrub pythons are being produced at a better clip than some of the other types. I put them up there as one of my picks for like the best pet, if you can accommodate the space needs for them and the size.
What are you looking at for caging a Barneck?
My adults, I predominantly use cages that are 6 feet wide, 2 feet deep, and 2.5 feet tall.
Okay.
You can go bigger than that. The 2.5 foot height is great for me because I can triple stack them in my room and utilize more of that vertical space. Where if I had 3 foot tall cages, that top cage is getting a little high up there. So that's and honestly in my room now I don't even have tall enough ceilings for that. Are
you keeping everything in your house, or do you have a separate facility?
Yeah, everything's in the house.
Impressive.
It's as good as it can be. It's as good as it can be for having a house full of reptiles.
Yeah.
But it is that it's a house full of reptiles. And this is not my permanent long-term goal with it, but it was what I kind of needed to do at the time, and I made the best of it. So yeah, that's what I think is like a good size enclosure for an adult scrub python. The one thing that I will say that is works in the favor of scrub pythons when you compare them to some of the other larger species is that they grow a lot slower than retics and berms and rock pythons. So if you get a baby and you are raising that baby up, you're feeding him at a good pace, but not a heavy pace. You're not looking at that snake being 10 feet long for 6 or 7 years. That gives you a lot of time to learn that animal, form a relationship with it, be comfortable with the snake hook, be comfortable with how it reacts to you within its setup. It's not like a retic where you get a hatchling and it's 7 feet long in a year. You have a lot more time to really become comfortable with that animal. Like for instance, that the scrub python I told you was the first one that I got back in 2017, who now is a multiple time proven breeder. He's like 9 feet long, and he's 7.5 years old.
Nice.
The biggest scrub python I've ever had was 14 feet. He was a monster. I didn't raise that snake, obviously. He was probably like 20 years old when I acquired him too.
Wow.
But that's like seeing someone who's like 7'2". That's an outlier.
How big around was he? Can you show me with your hands?
Not that big, like
4 inches across, probably 3.5,
5 inches, like not what you'd probably think. Still very slender, proportionally. And then other than that, I've had a few that are 12 foot, and those are big. I would say, that's why I say average adult size is about 10 feet. But some will reach their adult size and not even be 9 feet long, but there's no way to really predict that. There's just a range with these snakes, that I'm still trying to figure out if there is a way to predict it, if the size of the adults will predicate the size of the babies, or and I haven't had the time to raise one until they're 15 years old, because they, all reptiles, they keep growing just at a very, very slow pace in some instances. But like I have some 10-foot adults where you put them side by side, they're the same length. One has the head that's twice the size of the other.
Wow. And
like that to me that's just like another 6-7 years of life on that snake. It filled out a little bit more, but then like its head grew. So I'm still learning exactly how that all works. The species that I think in the long run has the potential to be the best from a pet standpoint. There's just one very, very major factor that limits it, are the Halmahera scrubs. They average about 8 foot as adults. From at least my experience with a couple captive bred animals and animals that I've had for a long time, majority of them have pretty good temperaments. They're a lot more subdued in their enclosure than Barnacks or Moluccans, where with those snakes, they're very curious. They have a very high feeding response. I'm oftentimes, especially if they're awake and they're out, I'm not changing that water bowl without removing the snake from the enclosure first. With the Halmaheras, though, they don't engage you until you engage them. You can spot clean right next to them, and they're pretty much going to sit there unless you touch them. The problem is that up until a few years ago, they were the only species of python that had never been bred in captivity. And they have been bred in captivity less than 10 times ever. So, and as far as I know, not one of those babies has been offered to the public.
Wow.
They have small clutches for scrub pythons. I want to say the average from what we've seen is like 5 to 7 eggs, where like the Barnacks and Moluccans and stuff like that, I'd say average is about 10 to 12.
Have you bred them, or do you not want to talk about that right now?
No, I haven't. I tried this year. I think my female that I thought was ready was just a little bit too young. But next year I have 4 females that I'm going to be trying. So
wow.
I hope I can do it. But they were first bred at the Oklahoma City Zoo by Blake Bauer. That was in 2019. And then they were bred subsequently twice by Chuck Poland, 3 times by Shane Adamson. These guys are in the U.S. And then Raphael Dahl, he's in, I think he's in Germany, but he's in Europe. He has bred them 2 or 3 times now as well. And that's it.
Wow.
And none of those animals have seen, I think a couple maybe have changed hands to some of the other people who have bred them, and that's really about it. So that would be the difficulty with those, as far as like making them like this. This is like the pet scrub python. I would assume we're 5 to 10 years away from maybe even being able to consider that from like a captive breeding standpoint.
I want them even more now.
They're incredible. They really are. They're incredible. I have a group of 3.5, and
wow.
I love them. They're amazing snakes. Actually, I have one to my right as we speak, just chilling. They're beautiful, and the captive bred ones, for some reason, are like higher colored, more brilliant, more beautiful than the wild caught ones. I mean, Shane Adamson has posted some of his babies that he produced that are like 80, 90% gold. Just
wow.
like mind blowing. Where you know a lot of the ones that were wild caught over the years, they're just like varying shades of brown, you'd think, but yellow, kind of yellow gold, orange gold, silver, different shades of brown and tan. I have a female. Actually, I'll take that back. I don't know the sex of it, but I have a young one that I'm raising up that is like similarly like very gold throughout the entire body. They're incredible. And no one really cared about them all that much until probably like 2016, 2017 is when I think they kind of skyrocketed a bit in popularity. But unlike what I was saying about how a lot of scrub pythons are easy enough to establish as imports, not the case for Halmaheras. There's a couple other localities like Beox that on the same level are not super easy to establish. You can do everything, and sometimes they just don't want to make that transition, and they crash out, and you lose them. I've lost a handful of imported Halmaheras over the years. So you can't. I mean, they do pop up from time to time, but it's not quite as much of a guarantee as like an imported Barnack or a Highland or something like that.
All of yours are wild caught?
Yeah.
Nice. Well, I'm excited for you. I hope that works out.
I hope so too, because I would love to see that. To be able to raise some up that I produced would be that would be amazing.
Yeah, put me on the list for one of those. I was going through your Instagram and they continuously grab my eye.
Yeah.
And then when I messaged you about it, you're like, yeah, that's actually one that's legal in Florida. And I'm like, oh, nice. That's kind of cool. And it seems like their size is fairly manageable. It's not ridiculous.
Yeah. Like my biggest ones are in 4x2x2s.
Oh, nice.
Pretty straightforward. Yeah. I mean, you can obviously go bigger with them. But for, they look like they fit in those enclosures. You're not like, oh, that thing could use an upgrade. It's like, sure, it could, but definitely doesn't need one.
Yeah. So about the size of a Timor.
Much smaller than Timors.
Smaller.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I mean, Timors can be big. I've been around. I've worked with Timors that were about 9 foot and like about the girth of a Burmese python at that size. Timors are bigger. Timors they're not carpet python size. They're like dwarf retic size.
What have I done? Well, they are Malayo python, right? I see when I talked to Ryan, I think he said his female was in a 4x2x2. And I was like, all right,
Yeah.
We'll
I mean,
see.
these snakes could have been, but 4 times the girth of a Halmahera scrub.
Wow.
They were older. They were probably closer to 15 years old.
Okay.
They grow slowly for sure, Timor pythons. But they can get big. So I've heard of, again, outlier cases, but like 12-foot
Timor
pythons that were like,
no way.
Yeah, they're not small. There have been people that just haven't fed theirs enough. That's what I'll say. They stopped them at subadult. Wow.
All right. Well, I'll keep that in mind. That's solid information. I've never seen one that big, and God knows I've scoured the internet for pictures.
I think it was San Diego Zoo. I saw one in their off exhibit that I was just like, that's a Timor python? That is a reticulated python.
Yeah.
I'm like, that thing is fucking giant.
Wow.
Like, damn, mine are not ready to go anytime soon. Holy shit.
Now, what do you think that's going to affect the lifespan of that animal? Do you think that they might be feeding it too much?
San Diego Zoo is a great place, but their Boland's pythons would be on my 500-pound life or whatever. Some of these zoos, they like to feed their animals.
Yeah, and I think that they equate that to healthy, right? It's not like anybody is feeding their animal and thinking, oh, I hate this, I'm going to kill it with so much food. They're thinking, oh, I'm going to feed this because that's what makes everything healthy, right?
I mean, honestly, from the zoo standpoint, I think it's more like it could even come down to whoever the keeper is. Maybe somebody who had they were like a bird keeper before. Now they're doing snakes. I think also a lot of it's some of these zoos. The way that the zoo field works is a lot of, funding from here and from there and from grants and from a lot of times. Like, I feel like that keeper isn't really thinking about the rodent budget. It's like, these are in the freezer. Let's use them. We have them.
Yeah.
And this is not every zookeeper, but I think from people I've talked to in the field, I'm like, oh, you're a zoo field person. You're not necessarily a reptile keeper or whatnot. You have your zoology degree and your internship from here and from there, and now you're working your way up the bureaucracy. So, and again, like I said, a lot of different zoos are very different in the ways that they operate. But yeah,
I wonder if I could find pictures of that animal. I want to see that now. I want to see a giant Timor like that.
I don't know if I have pictures of that animal, but I could probably try to dig some up of some of the other ones that I was telling you about that I had worked with. They were the animals that Gourmet Rodent had bred. So they were breeder animals that they've bred multiple times. So it's not like they were just these giant lumbering sausages that never did anything. Yeah. So yeah, Timors are definitely they're bigger than people give them credit for, I think.
How that's what I keep hearing. I think I recently heard that on NPR. They were
Okay.
talking. I think they were talking to Cody Joe, and he was talking about how he had a huge female.
Yeah.
I'm like, what have I gotten myself into here? I mean, I want a retech, but yeah. And I figured that's the Florida variation of the retech that's still legal.
Exactly.
Kind of, I'm excited about that, and then also thinking I need to figure out where to put some bigger cages because maybe a 4x2x2 won't be good enough,
But then the thing is, they're young. You have a long time.
Yeah,
you have a long time until they reach that size. They don't have the growth rate of reticks. I bet you could push 1-2, but it probably wouldn't be very good for it.
Yeah, I'm not interested in that.
Yeah, you got a lot of time on your hands, especially if they're like you said, yearlings or 2-year-olds.
Yeah, I have a 22 male and a pair from 23.
Yeah, you have years to figure out that larger enclosure if you need it.
How many F2 Timors do you think are in the country?
Probably none. Probably
that's my goal, kind of my dream is producing F2s.
Because Ryan's are F1.
Yeah.
And I don't really know. I don't know where a lot of the gourmet rodent Timors went, if anybody, because they're definitely adult age now. The ones that they were producing. That would be the only hope at the current moment, like in the immediate future for F2 Timors would be if any of the ones that came out of the gourmet rodent made it to adulthood somewhere and someone's trying to breed them. But I'm not sure of any of that. I'm a little out of the loop on that stuff.
I really love those animals. They're so cool, so intelligent. The flightiness, I hope that they just grow out of that. And it seems like the more and more time that goes on, they're becoming more bold and more okay with me.
Yeah, I think once they get just more comfortable with how you work them and how that routine goes, that most snakes will calm down like that.
The Halmaheras, are they pretty? I mean, you said that they don't really react too much when you go in their cage. Or they don't really seem to have too much of like a flighty side. They're more.
No, definitely not.
Mellow.
Yeah, I have some that aren't the friendliest of my group, but like only a couple. Most of them I handle pretty normally without a whole lot of thought. They go from their like comatose state to like stand their ground. They don't really run. They probably will sooner want to bite you than piss on you and flee. But like I have some that I literally like open the enclosure, lift the hide, and just go scoop, put it in my head. That's how I do it with them. So
nice. Well, why don't we get into a little care guide for the Halmaheras?
Sure.
You down? So let's look at this kind of from the perspective that this is somebody's pet, right? So it's going to be on display out in the house. So no tubs, nothing like that. Just kind of looking at it from a display pet perspective, a pet scrub python.
Yes. So what I will say to that, I've only, especially with wild caught animals, I mean, those things they're in tubs for a couple of years before they see a cage. Like let's say, for instance, you could get your hands on a captive bred animal. If someone's watching this in 7 years and they're actually available, you theoretically could. If for anyone who's getting a wild caught animal, I would strongly encourage you to start it off in a dark tub, as far away from activity as possible, and just let that thing settle in, let it eat. Because they have this very like far gone look in their eyes when they're freshly imported. And like a year and a half later, a switch will just flip and then they're a normal scrub python. But for a while, they look kind of dead. I mean, it kind of sounds dark, but like anyone who's worked with fresh wild caught helmet hares knows exactly what I'm talking about. They have this like glazed over eye look to them. They could be eating and doing fine. They seem like they're not fully settled yet. I think you put that snake in a cage and it dies in short order.
All right, so let me retract that. Eventually in a cage. So we'll kind of get to the eventual caging needs and all that, because I totally understand all that. Like I said, I have my Timors. The two younger ones are in tubs, just because their their response to feeding is exponential in that scenario.
Yeah. So the primary thing is to set them up accordingly to where you live. You know, you doing it and me doing it is entirely different. I'm in the desert and you're in Florida.
Yeah.
You know, I would say you would need an enclosure with a decent amount of ventilation. Scrub pythons do not do well in stagnant moisture. Their skin is kind of sensitive and very prone to blistering. Like for instance, if you have a scrub python in a rack in a tub with water and paper, you go on vacation for a week. The night you leave, it knocks over that water bowl. It's in a lower tub in the rack, so it's kind of cold now. You come back and now that snake has blisters all over it.
Wow.
Where like a ball python or a carpet python, you wouldn't have that concern. So you would need you need to adjust your setup to where you'll get spikes in humidity for sure, because they're a tropical species, but where the physical moisture itself can dry out. If I was keeping scrub pythons in Florida, I'd probably never spray them. Just keep a fresh water bowl, and that ambient humidity will be great for them. Obviously, for me out here, I bet my humidity is 15% right now today outside. They get sprayed multiple times a week. They're on, bedding that will absorb that moisture. When I'm cleaning them, typically like I'll dump their water bowl out into their bedding to spike the humidity. You do that in Florida, you're getting mold, you're getting blisters. That's not going to be good. So primary thing, adjust to your climate. The way that I'm keeping them won't be the way that you keep them there. Won't be the way that I kept them in Chicago. Won't be the way someone keeps them in Northern California. But with that said, general parameters though, if you have a room where you're keeping reptiles on ambient temperature, great. For me, I like doing ambient as much as I can, especially for animals that aren't breeders. It's so much safer. You don't have to worry about all the heat tape, and it's less expensive. It's easier on the electric bill. You're not having to buy a bunch of expensive thermostats and stuff like that. 78 to 82 degrees, you're good. If you're in an apartment, let's say, and you have a cage in your living room, different story. You keep your thermostat at 73, for instance. Then in that enclosure, I'd probably want a hot spot reading around 86. That would create like a mid to upper 70s ambient on the cool side. If you're in a humid area, you could theoretically keep them in like a glass Exoterra style setup if you wanted to. PVC cages are always great as well. Obviously I got PVC cages behind me.
So you're not doing any supplemental heat. You're just doing ambient.
So for me in particular, I have a few different rooms where I do things a couple different ways. Where I am right now is on the second floor of my house. It's kind of in an open area that it's walled off with cages, but not temperature controlled. So everything in here has supplemental heat. I have a room where I have all my babies and stuff like that, and that's all ambient. And then the room where my adult scrubs are, it will go through phases. So like right now, it's starting to get really hot. Probably this week, I'm going to shut all the heat off in that room, and it'll be, it probably won't get below 79 until October, and running AC the whole time. But then in the winter, and obviously for breeding, everyone's getting supplemental heat. Females have their basking spots, and then the room will drop into the low 70s, high 60s as part of like cycling them. Where like this space I'm in right now, is going to stay pretty stagnant as far as temperature goes year round. Days during the summer are going to be hotter than days during the winter. So I have dialed back some of their heat a little bit. But still, I mean, I got to sleep at night. So I got to turn down the temperature a little bit.
Yeah.
So that's how I'm doing that. So for me, really, I'm keeping a few different ways in a few different rooms in my house.
Yeah.
Because none of the other rooms are going to be getting a 73-degree ambient temperature, but this room will. And like, if I just fed the night before, I need those snakes to have a little bit of supplemental heat, back up in the day when they're digesting. So like I said, I'll probably have them with an 85 to 86 degree hotspot.
So you just let that kind of rise up during the day, and then it'll drop a little bit at night.
Yeah, and like the racks, I have a couple racks near some freedom breeders, and they'll be on all the time, but they're that small strip in the back where the snakes can have a pretty huge range of when they burrow down the bedding a little bit, get right on top of it, they can probably get almost up to 90. But then if they go all the way to the front of the tub, they're probably 74, 73. So they always have that range there. But anyway, I guess back to the care requirements. So let's say you're in Florida, you can set them up a bunch of different ways. As long as you have good ambient humidity in your room, and keep those temperatures kind of around the parameters that I was laying out. They're hardy. They can take temperature swings. They can take humidity swings. They're not the most sensitive species in the world as far as that goes. Their sensitivity comes with their skin and with that, stagnant.
Are they really soft like a Timor?
Yeah.
I'm blown away by how soft
they feel like velvet. Very, very soft, kind of delicate skin relative to some other pythons.
Sure. Yeah. Every time my kids touch one of my Timor pythons, they're like, "It's so soft."
That's
so
what pythons are.
In your opinion, are they a display animal, or are they something you can take out, like a pet, something you can take out, interact with, sit down with, play around with?
I would say some of the calmest snakes I've ever had have been scrub pythons. Like I would take out some of them that I've raised or the ones I produced and like hand them to a 2-year-old.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
So they have a terrible, I mean, maybe not a terrible reputation, but they have a reputation,
they had a terrible reputation. There were a couple of people that were really, they like to emphasize how terrible these snakes were. And I think primarily because they worked with them and wanted to feel special. Like, look at me, I can tame the beast kind of thing. It's like, you're treating them like they're this Bushmaster, Black Mamba, King Cobra, super hybrid. Like,
yeah,
no, they're not. They're a python. They're a python like all other pythons are pythons. To me, you take like all the best aspects of a lot of the different pythons, put them all into one species, and you get these. But yeah, especially with captive bred ones, if you raise them from when they're young, like the animals that I was saying, like I would be comfortable handing these to small children. The ones I've had since they were babies. There's animals I've gotten as 3-4-year-old wild caughts that I can interact with. I might not hand them to a child because you never really know. But with these animals, I'm like, they're perfect. They're calmer than a lot of the ball pythons I've had. And I'm very intentional about doing that. I don't handle them all the time, but like once or twice a week when I'm cleaning them, I handle them. When they're babies, my strategy is I throw under the hide or whatever, I lift the hide and then I grab them from the top down like this, because their typical response is going to be to like look up at you and rear back. That's their defensive response. So the way I see it, if you grab them from the top, that kind of desensitizes them to that response. And so then when you have a bigger animal that isn't going to have that kind of knee-jerk look up at you defensive reaction, it's just going to lend to that animal being that much calmer. And it's not just me. I know there's a lot of people that, especially with the captive bred scrubs, they're perfect snakes. They're very interactive. They move, but they don't really move that quickly. They like to grab onto you. They like to move upward. Like if I'm ever in an interaction with a scrub python, I can tell they're getting stressed out. I just like raise them over my head and get them fixated on like the top of a cage or something like that. And then they just want to go. They want to go up. They feel comfortable when they're higher up than whatever might be stressing them out. You know, I have some that would like crawl up in my head and kind of like curl up, like, you know, and just sit there while I'm cleaning their enclosure. They really are, as far as like that goes, like an interactive, larger but not too large pet snake. I think they're the best option out there, especially captive bred ones.
Wow.
And that's part of why I, you know, got into them the way that I did. It was like, I think there's a massive void here in the hobby for a snake like this. And also, this is just meant to be purely factual, not like I'm shitting on retics, but I already said what it is going to be. I think they're the best alternative to retics, because no matter what, you know, people love retics. I like retics. They could be banned tomorrow again, theoretically. A lot of people don't understand how the Lacey Act legislation works. The Lacey Act is not just about the snakes. It's a sweeping bill. It's mostly related to plants, lots of aquatic life. It's just a commerce bill about injurious wildlife. The 5 python species were added to it, reticulated pythons included, which, you know, you can't import them, you can't transport them across state lines, yada yada. They were not taken off the Lacey Act. The way the entire Lacey Act was interpreted for everything got changed. There are some industries that are pissed at us, especially like the horticultural industry, because there are injurious plants that probably need to be restricted. But for the sake of removing the snakes off of it, the entire interpretation of that piece of legislation got changed. Who's to say it can't go back? It's not gone. It's still there. It's just being enforced differently.
Sure.
We can't import these animals anymore, but we can move them across state lines. So I think there's just a big vulnerability. I know one of the things that is trying to be done to protect that on the retic side is to reclassify some of these dwarf locality types as a different species.
I'd love that.
So where,
I made a giant. Oh, sorry.
No, I was like,
crosstalk.
Yeah, no, go for it.
I would love to see the dwarf and super dwarves available in Florida. I don't think it's ever going to happen, but if they maybe could do something with subspecies or something to break them off a little bit further.
Yeah. And you know, I don't know. I haven't seen any of the research, but just based on the way that other species get split up, I would say it's probably likely. The right genetic work needs to be done. But the same way that green tree pythons are all a bunch of different species now, the same can be applied to a lot of different reptiles from that region of the world. But with that said, that hasn't come through yet, and retics haven't been rebanned, so to speak, yet. But they are concerns. There's never been national level legislation about scrub pythons. There's there are a bunch of different little municipalities around the country that have a bunch of weird laws, like the whole thing with the Dallas Reptile Show. If you can't sell a python that's not a ball python there, because that's the law in Dallas. I'm like, wow, that's crazy.
That is crazy.
This is my state where I came here to keep venomous snakes. And there's one of the biggest cities, you can't even keep a carpet python. Oh, you can't even keep a children's python. Like, you know,
that's nuts.
Let's not even think about the bigger stuff. You can't keep an anthill python in Dallas because it's not a ball python. Talk about uninformed legislation, but that's another topic. So from a legality standpoint, I think there's the scrub pythons are in a much better place than reticulated pythons are, and I think it's mostly just like a lack of exposure on a larger scale. You know, most people in the U.S. these days, you say the phrase Burmese python, they know what that is.
Yeah.
Um, maybe same way ball python. Probably most people in the country have heard of a ball python. The number 3 python is probably a reticulated python, because of people like Jay Brewer posting a bunch of crazy videos on the internet. I guess I won't go down that rabbit hole, but not good. But then who the hell knows what a scrub python is? Who the hell knows what a Papuan python is? There's a lot of these animals that are just there's not known in the public eye, and I think for that coupled with they haven't been found in the wild in the U.S., which is a plus. The only reason that there would be legislation levied against them if there was legislation levied against a lot of different shit all at once. The same thing that would affect ball pythons or whatever. So from a legality standpoint, I think they offer a good alternative for a big snake because they're not involved in any national level legislation.
Yeah, it's I think the reputation that I was exposed to was early in the 2010s, maybe even going back to 2010, we'll say, was when I was first keeping. And I remember seeing them in a couple books and being just blown away. Wow, what is this snake? And my connections at the time were like, oh, you want a snake that'll get to be 18 feet long and bite your face off every time you go in to touch it, so that was sort of what then, you take a little comment like that and it's burned into your brain. Then every time you hear scrub python, that's the first thing that comes to mind.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm trying to do my best, and I know there are a lot of other people that are as well, of showing how that's not the case. I mean, for one, there's a reason why on my Instagram page I have pictures of the snakes in my hands.
Yeah.
It's like there are hundreds and hundreds of pictures of scrub pythons in my left hand without puncture wounds all over me. That picture wouldn't be possible if that snake was as evil as everyone would like to think. So yeah, it's like I want my page is like a case study of why scrub pythons don't have this terrible attitude.
I love it. And I love that you're giving them that exposure. And then also when somebody like me is curious and interested, it's not, no, you're not ready. There's no way you could handle this much snake. You know?
Yeah. Sean Childress, he's a keeper in the Chicago area. He kept scrub pythons when I was first getting into it. And I asked him, like, I don't know if I'm ready for these. And, he's like, well, what do you have now? I'm like, oh, I keep like carpets and white lips, Timors, olives, stuff like that. He's like, oh, you already do it. Yeah. These are just pythons. Like, that's it. Like, they're just a python that have some different personality traits, but like, there's not some giant difference between the rest of the pythons and scrub pythons. They're just another python. Yeah. You got to be ready for a snake that's going to get big. But like at that time for me, I already kept olive pythons. They're like the same size wise as scrub pythons and even a little bit heavier bodied. For me, I always make sure that anyone who I'm selling to, this is not their first python or whatever. But like if you were to reach out to me like, hey, I'm interested in scrub pythons. I have these Timor pythons from Ryan Young. To me, I'm like, okay, you take this seriously. You have similar snakes. You got them from basically the best source you can. So you've done your research. To me, I'm like, this is perfect. This is everything that I look for when, when someone is reaching out to me. If someone's like misspelled, poor grammar text, and I go on their page and I don't see anything with reptiles or mutual friends or whatever, I'm like, are you sure? Are you sure you don't want a ball python first? They're
like, but I got this 55-gallon aquarium.
Yeah.
Your scrub will fit in there perfectly.
Exactly. But I will say, though, I do think that there are scenarios where a scrub python could be your first snake. Not for everybody. I know people who have gotten a scrub python as their first snake, and it's gone great. I have one friend who she's actually bred scrub pythons, and I believe a scrub python was her first snake. So, it's not. You got to be ready. You got to know what's going on. You got to probably be a pretty intelligent person to begin with, and have a lot of your research done. But with how captive bred scrub pythons are becoming more prominent, I don't think that that's an impossibility. Certainly not for everybody. But the same way that some people get a retake for their first snake, 20 years ago, if someone said, if you were to say to somebody that, oh, I want to reticulate a python as my first snake, they'd be like, are you out of your mind?
Yeah.
What are you thinking? This snake's going to get 20 feet long and it's aggressive and it's yada, yada, yada. But now I want a albino golden child, 75% Kalatoa, something. It'll get like 7 feet long and it's however many generations captive bred on the morph side. And it's all nice and calm. And like, sure, I understand that.
Yeah.
With the right guidance, that could definitely be someone's first snake. So I think scrub pythons theoretically could be seen the same way, like I said, under the right circumstances.
Nice. So just real clearly defined, what are your temperature guidelines for, let's say you have sort of a sub-adult, maybe an adult, let's just say, we're a couple of years in the future and we have that F1 Halmahera and it's ready to go from the bin into a 4x2x2 or something similar. What kind of temperatures are you looking at for that? Considering it's just in a house with AC running, so not on ambient.
Sure. Yeah. So I would probably shoot for that, like a hot spot around like 85, 86, where on the cool side, you're probably hitting the upper 70s. Pretty straightforward like that, to try to keep the mean temperature in the lower 80s, or around 80 degrees. They don't need to be particularly hot. The only time a scrub python ever really needs to be hot is a gravid female basking, or a female developing follicles basking, and that's really about it. And like I said, they can take swings, especially really solid established animals. But if you're keeping one in your living room or your bedroom or whatever, shoot for like an 86 degree hotspot, cool side ambient in the upper 70s, average cage temperature around 80 degrees.
Sounds good. So now what happens if it gets warmer? What happens if it goes up to 90 for 2 or 3 hours out of the day and the cool side is still 78, 80?
Absolutely nothing.
Okay.
Yeah. They're
just going to keep on scrubbing.
They might just go to the cool side, or they might enjoy that higher basking temperature for a shorter period of time.
Yeah. Okay.
They're not dumb snakes. That's for sure. There are dumb snakes out there, like green tree pythons. Green tree pythons are beautiful and absolutely stupid.
I'm going to clip that.
Please do, by all means. I'll say it again. But scrub pythons they're not that way. They'll move if they need to. They're not drowning in an inch of water.
Okay. So when you and I've noticed that with my Timors, the female, after she eats, she goes out and she'll take all that basking temperature she can get. And that might vary from 86 to 89, it'll kind of go up and then it'll start to go down. And I just love seeing that. I love seeing activity where you actually see them utilize different things in their space. Exactly. So what is it about green tree pythons? Can you elaborate on that a little bit? I'm curious.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I love green tree pythons. I only have one green tree python right now. I've worked with many over the years. I've bred them multiple times. But I think anyone who keeps green tree pythons will tell you they just do unintelligent things sometimes. They have like crazy feeding responses, which is a good thing. But like, I've had to stop green tree pythons from like eating paper towels and stuff like that. And I at one time had to pull a pair apart from each other. I probably should have just separated them before feeding to begin with, but there's just not a lot going on upstairs with them. And that's is what it is. Not like a bad thing necessarily, but they're kind of like, they're like the dumb blonde stereotype of snakes.
Very pretty.
Yes. But yeah, I mean, there definitely are levels to snake intelligence. And, obviously once you kind of start comparing it to like lizards or even like crocodilians. They're very low intelligence animals. But there's a range. With pythons, you have like scrub pythons, retics, and pop one pythons at the top end of the range, and down at the bottom end of the range. I think that's where green tree pythons fall.
Yeah. So how do you verify your temps? Just a temp gun?
Temp gun. I have a good amount of like the sensor push temperature sensors around my house. I'm always checking that. The Herpstat 4s will show you not only what you have it set to, but then the actual reading at the probe site. So that's helpful as well, just walking by. But I mostly go just based off of those ambient room temperatures. And then, when I'm cleaning, I'll touch the heat panel or make sure everything's good. They'll unplug shit. They'll push probes around. The snakes will be snakes. I'm actually staring at a snake that unplugged its heat panel right now, so I got to go fix that. But yeah, for me, I mostly focus on the ambient, and especially with snakes that aren't breeding, and especially now that it's summertime, the ambient temperature is really what I'm shooting for, and then supplemental heat at that point, if the ambient temperature is good, sometimes isn't even necessary. So.
Cycling temps as if you were going to breed. Do you recommend that for just somebody that's just keeping one animal?
You don't need to. You don't really need to necessarily. I would say, if anything, for someone who's just keeping one animal for like long-term health, giving that animal a couple of breaks a year from food would probably be more beneficial than anything else.
Why?
In the wild, they just kind of naturally will. Even some of these tropical species that they don't experience much of a temperature difference, they'll experience like dry seasons. And then any species that relies even moderately on bird migration will have kind of gorge periods where the migratory birds are there. They eat as many of them as they can. The birds leave, and now they have less prey for however long. But then in captivity, though, it does seem that the animals that have true longevity, once they reach adult size, and that's a very important caveat, once they reach adult size, are fed moderately, those are the ones that really do well. If they're fed moderately when they're young, those animals subsequently don't do quite as well as adults.
Can you define that? Like, give some parameters on moderate and
so for me with my pythons, until they're at least 2 years old, they get a weekly meal no matter what. And because I've gotten animals from other collections that were they were pretty strict on a light feeding schedule, and I would consider some of those animals stunted. Even, I've acquired scrub pythons that were like 2 years old, captive bred, that were the size of neonates. I put them on my feeding schedule, and they still haven't caught up 4 years later to where I think they should be size-wise. I think that nutrition at a young age is vitally important for their longevity. But with that said, you gotta slow them down at a certain point, because that's probably in like around 3 years old, 3 to 4 years old, depending on the species. They're going to use those calories to grow when they're small. That's where they're going to go. But eventually, once their body is more developed, their musculature more defined, the excess will become fat stores. And that is obviously super detrimental to these animals. I would say most complications of captive snakes in particular come from overfeeding, but come from overfeeding overfeeding meaning feeding them too much once they are older. I have some adult scrub pythons that might see 10 meals a year, and maybe not even that.
Wow.
If I were to feed a 3-year-old that way, it would never grow, and it would be unhealthy. It would, develop problems at a young age, die early. So, feeding is very dependent on the stage of life. But like, for instance, my ball pythons that I still have that, they're all over 10 years old, I maybe feed them once a month. And sometimes maybe I'm like, oh, I haven't fed them for 6 weeks. I'll feed them. And they are always ready for food at that point. A lot of adult ball pythons, they're notorious for going off of food. And I wonder if that's just because they're overfed to begin with. Because and they have very, very healthy body structure. They're not skinny by any means. They look like ball pythons, but they're always ready for food because they're not getting fed weekly.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, a lot of the times when they are being fed weekly at some of these bigger facilities, it's because they want an extra egg out of that next clutch. And then that snake dies when it's 11 years old.
Yeah.
That snake should live until it's 50 to 60. I understand the purpose of commercial breeding. I commercially bred rodents. I'm not on my high horse here. But for me, where I'm at with my animals, that longevity is a focus of mine. And, I'd rather my snake live an extra 10 years than get an extra 10 eggs from it over however long.
Sure.
And I probably will with the species that I'm working with, because the ball pythons, they're naturally built to maintain a higher amount of body fat. Scrub pythons, not so much. So a fat ball python could be a better breeder year over year, as far as this one weighs an extra 500 grams. I'm getting 2 extra eggs from it. Scrub python, not so much.
Yeah.
That extra weight will be detrimental to breeding. So again, very much a case by case type of thing, which is why you can't approach feeding every species the same way across the board.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That's the biggest thing I've noticed since I came back to the hobby is the individualized care for every species, between temperatures, feeding, everything. Everything is it's so much different than the way I left the hobby.
And there are a lot of similarities. Like, most pythons can be kept in a way that's like 90% similar to the next one. But then there's that last 10% where you kind of have to adjust little things from species to species, whether it's temperatures or cycling for breeding, how you feed them, when you feed them, prey size, prey frequency, these little things that make a big difference, but are very minute when you compare to the overall picture of, you can keep every python, maybe with the exception of Boland's pythons and carpet pythons, within about the same parameters. But then for it to be absolutely perfect, that's where you got to tweak that last 5 to 10%.
So if you do plan on breeding, let's say you have a pair of Halmaheras, and at what age are you going to start cycling the temperatures?
I might do that by about 4 years old, even if they're not even close to breeding, just so that they're accustomed to that cycle. And it's like a natural annual thing for them. I would say typically across the board with scrub pythons, sexual maturity is about 6 years old. Some can breed younger, but most don't. I've had 5-year-old females lay clutches for me, but far more that have not than have. And some might need to be 7 or 8 years old. So there's a lot of individual variation within these snakes as well. And I'll give a big caveat saying this is also with wild caught animals. Captive bred will likely end up falling into a more regimented cycle just because they are captive. There's not that adjustment period of wild to captivity with those snakes. This is their life. So same way it worked with retics, ball pythons, New Caledonian geckos, monitor lizards. The captive bred ones they're more tuned into this system because this is what they do. Yeah. But I would say, like, if I raise a captive bred pair of Halmaheras, I think size is important too for breeding. I just think sometimes smaller animals just won't breed, females in particular. But let's say that my female is like 7 feet long. Like, okay, she's probably of that size where she could lay. I would cycle her the same way that I would cycle anything else. Once it starts getting cooler, wherever you are, temperatures start to drop. eliminate food for a little while, and then bring it back up in a couple of months, reintroduce food, give them a couple of really big meals. That always seems with a lot of pythons, out of cooling down, a couple big meals in succession seem to really trigger them to go through that process. I like to pair during the cool down. Not everyone does this. For instance, like retic breeders won't put their retics together until the female's off of food. Scrub pythons, some of them won't even refuse food before ovulating. I found that they'll refuse food with about a week or a week and a half before ovulation. So if you waited until she stopped eating, well, if she wasn't paired up before, then she probably wouldn't have stopped eating to begin with. She would have just reabsorbed her follicles and moved on like normal. But I've always been a believer that that pairing spurs follicular development. So the female might not have follicles. There's some environmental stimulus that are, priming her for that process. But now the male's around, maybe even a copulation, having that presence of that male, having that mating event could be what triggers her to start producing her follicles.
Okay.
Even though that lock might come 5-6 months before eggs, I believe that has something to do with the process starting for that female.
Interesting.
It's worked out for me so far. Where I also believe that I've paired some females up late to where they were already developing on their own. The breeding didn't begin early enough, and I've gotten like slug clutches because of it.
So you're taking them off food, cooling them down, and then pairing, and then you're bringing the temperatures back up, introducing food again, bringing food back into it, larger meals.
Yep.
And you're separating them, or are they staying together that whole time?
Obviously I'll separate them for feeding, but I like to keep them together as much as possible. For me, I'm still figuring out how to do all this. So I like to work on 1-to-1 ratios as much as possible. Mm-hmm. I know I've missed clutches because I had a male that was with another female still getting the job done, but I needed this female bred too. But then I've also successfully done that once or twice too. But with that said, I'd much rather just have that extra male and be able to keep all my females covered than to risk missing a clutch because I just didn't have an available male ready to go.
Are you manipulating the males in any way by taking like a shed skin and putting it in another cage to kind of?
I did that with the scrubs for the first time this year. Actually, a little bit inadvertently. I had one pair that it was a female that I bred in 2022. I wanted to take a different male to her. And they weren't doing anything. This was a male that I've raised from almost a baby. It was my second scrub python I got. And I've had him with a number of females and I've never seen him copulate. I put the male in with the female that bred her the first time, who I was like, he's a stud. He'll breed anything. And he did lock her up, but he also shed in the enclosure. I didn't plan on this. So after he shed, I was like, I'm just going to keep this in here. So I took him out, put him with another female, the one I really wanted him to go to, took that original male, put him with that girl with his old shed in there. And like the next day they locked up.
No kidding. I'm
pretty sure he's the one who got her. So
are you going to use that, or is that a lever you're going to pull from now on?
If I need to, I have some really, really good breeder males that are just, they don't give a fuck. They're getting the job done. So if I need to, absolutely. But if it doesn't seem necessary, and if it's like some of my males that I'm like, these are just like the rock stars of the collection, I don't even really need to think about it because I know that they're going to get it done.
Nice. So with, do you use just radiant heat panels, or are you using, what else are you using? Are you using heat bulbs, anything like that?
I mean, for better or worse, I am just using radiant heat panels. I think if I was to redesign it all today, I probably use bulbs. But I already have all these heat panels, so I'm going to use these heat panels. But I do prefer the smaller heat panels. I think the bigger ones can just kind of flood out a little bit too much heat and not create a concentrated spot. Because it seems to me that they'll very intentionally bask in concentrated heat at certain areas of their body where they'll warm up and they'll kind of spread it throughout their follicles, but they don't necessarily need the direct heat on the entirety of their follicle mass or their egg mass.
Mm-hmm.
I've had clutches go bad where like these females had big heat panels, and then like my best clutches have been from females that had smaller heat panels, and then like for instance like Ryan Young uses exclusively heat bulbs, and no one else right now is doing the whole python breeding thing better than him. So
and he just has them on timers, right?
I believe so.
They just come on, heat up, and then turn off.
Yeah,
that's incredible. When I heard that on your pod,
don't fix it.
Yeah, when I heard that on your podcast, I'm like, man, that's a hell of a method. Keep it simple.
Yep, exactly. So, and like I have like LED lights in my cages as well. But other than that, what I will do is one thing that I do that a lot of people don't, and I'm not sure why. I keep my nest boxes in with my females year round. A lot of python breeders, particularly like green tree python breeders, carpet python breeders, will have issues of females not laying in their nest box. I have never had a scrub python not lay in their nest box. And I think it's because they're so accustomed to that space that they have it, because it doubles as their hide as well. It's in there year round. It's underneath, so that it's like panel, basking shelf, nest box, with then the panel of the cage that's below it right underneath. So there's a little bit of heat radiating into that box, where it's a bit warmer than the rest of the enclosure, which I think is useful as well.
Have you done maternal at all, or is that all you do?
No, I haven't. I don't think I could do it here with how dry it is.
Yeah. What are you putting in the nest box?
Sphagnum moss.
Okay.
And I think I would need to, like, I have a friend, Paul Duran, he has a clutch of Southerns on the ground right now. He's doing maternal incubation, but he concocted this like very elaborate nest box setup to where it would, maintain moisture and maintain the humidity, not get too bogged down for the eggs. Like, he went all out on his maternal incubation. I'm not going to do that. I have too many of these snakes, and so more credit to people like him who will. If I'm ever in an area that's more humid, I might try it. I'd love to. That would be such a rewarding thing to just open that nest box one day and just see a bunch of babies sitting in the mom's coils. So it's definitely a goal of mine. But I also, since I'm doing this as a profession, those eggs are very important for paying the bills around here as well. And I just feel comfortable most of the time, being more in control of that incubation.
What are the benefits and drawbacks of maternal incubation in your opinion?
I don't know. I think the benefit would be it's probably a lot more fun than artificial incubation. And I could only imagine. So like I know kind of because of some of the vipers that I've bred, because they give live birth. And like some like abronia lizards and stuff like that I've bred in the past. Opening that or walking into your room and just seeing a cage full of babies when the night before you didn't, it's hard to beat that. That feeling doesn't come from opening an egg box.
Yeah.
But then the benefit of, obviously, like particularly with scrub pythons, of taking those eggs away. One, they have a very long incubation. It's about 90 days. So there's a lot that can go wrong. Ball pythons or green trees are in that 50 range, a lot less time for something to go wrong. You can get that female back on food a lot quicker. Some will lose a lot of weight and you'll be like, oh my God, you got fucking drained. And then some others like will lay their eggs and look like they did before breeding season. But so I just like to get them back onto food. But I have nothing against maternal incubation. I think it's probably cooler if you can. Paul actually got his female has been eating with her eggs. Like she'll like come out and bask, eat, and like go back to her eggs.
Wow, that's so cool.
So like that would be such a cool process to observe firsthand, like how this female's natural rhythm is, because obviously they know what they're doing. I think you just need to give them the right parameters, and I know that the way that I do it, it's good for what I'm doing, but for maternal it would not be good.
Yeah, right on. So just in general, just for keeping, what is a good humidity if you're tracking that with a hygrometer? What's a number you'd want to see for a scrub?
I would say like generally probably like in the 50 to 65 range. But then, especially if you're in a drier area, a couple of sprays a week to spike the humidity and whatnot, you'll be good. But yeah, having good high quality water available for them, I think, is more important than like spraying. But ambient humidity is important too.
It's interesting. A lot of people think that since I'm in Florida, my house is humid as hell. But since the AC is running 24/7, I'm sitting right around 45, 50%.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah. Which was kind of a shock to me during the day when the AC doesn't run as much because we set it higher. So it's not running all the time.
Yeah.
It's maybe 55 to 60, right? But then once the AC kicks on, it like at night when we're sleeping, it's down at usually 47, 48.
Huh.
Yeah. So my substrate, my coconut chip, which is what I use in most of my cages, it dries out surprisingly fast. And so I'll go in and usually mist, I don't know, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, let's say, maybe 2 or 3 times a week.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is surprising. I think it's just because that AC is cranking all the time and dehumidifying,
Sure. Yeah.
So how are you keeping the humidity up? Just through substrate, water bowl, misting?
In my adult room, I run a couple humidifiers as well. If I didn't, it would be 10% humidity in there.
Okay.
So.
And that's keeping you right in that kind of 50, 60.
Yeah, at night when it cools off and it has the humidity has an opportunity to build a bit more. When I come in the morning, sometimes it's like in the upper 60s, but then by 6-7 p.m. it's probably down to like 40 to 45.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like to, for that room, I like to keep it above 40 if I can.
How often do you change your water?
I mean, I do it probably once a week. Usually, I'll do a intermittent change if it needs it. If someone spilled or shit in their water, or if a water bowl got a bunch of substrate in it or something like that. But yeah.
How are you sanitizing your bowls?
I use one of a few cleaners that I have, and then it's like soap and a sponge, wash them out. But then for my adults, otherwise I use disposable deli cups.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
So all the Neos are on deli cups. You just take them out and put a new one in.
Yeah, honestly, everything that's not like an adult scrub python has done. So even some of the bigger snakes in here have deli cups still. So just I've done it for a long time. It's fast and efficient, and if I didn't, I would probably be adding another 15 hours onto my work week.
Jeez. Yeah, I can't imagine with that many animals.
Yeah.
Do you recommend giving a bowl large enough to soak in?
I don't think it's necessary with them. Yeah, in my experience with scrub pythons, hasn't been everybody's who I've talked to, but if they're soaking, they have mites, and if they don't have mites, they're not soaking. People have told me that they have scrubs that'll soak and they don't have mites. I'm like, okay, I might not believe you, but with that said, I've never had one soak for no reason. So
that's a huge plus in my opinion, because when if somebody says, yeah, you should really give a bowl that they can soak in, it's like, geez Louise, for an 8-foot snake, that's a big ass water bowl.
Yeah, I mean, the only way you would really be able to do that efficiently is if you had a plumbed water tub in an enclosure or something like that. Because otherwise, it's prohibitive for for time and efficiency and whatnot.
Do you recommend UVB?
Neutral. I've done it. I've seen no benefit with my snakes. I mean, I can't imagine it would hurt them unless you're using a bulb that's way too high output, or like some of the LED UVBs have been led to like corneal injuries and stuff like that. If you set them up the wrong way or let them get too close to it or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. The way that I see it, I think the potential risks of doing it wrong outweigh the benefits for snakes. There's some lizard species that definitely need UV. Monitor lizards 100% do not need UVB.
Really?
Look at the history of monitor keeping and breeding. None of them, no breeder has ever used UV on like a big scale.
Wow.
I mean, I won't name names because I don't want to call them out, but I've had a couple of the most respected monitor breeders in the world tell me UV is a scam. Kind of tongue in cheek. Not that that's their full true opinion, but they've produced hundreds to thousands of monitor lizards and have had lizards live for decades and decades, and have never had an issue that you could be like, well, that thing really needed UV, didn't it? But I think that comes down to anything that eats full prey probably doesn't need it. I think proper diet and high quality prey is far more important than any sort of lighting.
And what do you think about, maybe supplementing with D3, talking about lizards right now, getting
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So like, for instance, when I was involved with the project of Abronia lizards, they had UV lighting, and supplement with calcium, with D3, without D3, multivitamin, carotenoids, bee pollen, all the stuff. So for some animals, it's 100% necessary. But then again, they're eating insect diets. I think anything that's eating rodent diets of any like matured rodent that eats on its own, so like a small mouse and bigger, and then like a weaned rat and bigger.
Mm-hmm.
If you have issues related to calcium deficiency, then you have bad feeders. It's not that you need, might lighting help in an instance like that, but you probably don't want to be feeding your animals crap to begin with. Which would cause any problems like that. So I don't know. I've never seen evidence that I think is compelling that snakes need UV lighting.
I use the 6% UV bulbs from Arcadia, just the fluorescence, because I feel safer using the fluorescence. I don't feel like there's been enough data on the LEDs yet.
Sure.
So I got it in there, it's on a timer.
Yeah. The only thing that, and you can even see in the back of some of my enclosures up top, I have some of those. They're just not on anymore. I didn't realize how damn hot they get.
It is crazy. Yeah. You almost don't, I almost don't need heat.
Oh no. I for a long time I had enclosures that I didn't run the heat panel and I just had that light on. But like there were some cages that even the smallest version in, when that light was on, it was 90 to 98 degrees in that cage.
Wow.
Without a spot that they could escape from it. I'm like,
wow,
I can't do this.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah.
So you don't always think of that, but the like T5 UVB strip lights, they emit a crap ton of heat.
Yeah, I have a lot of my I use heat, the deep heat emitters.
Yeah.
And a lot of them I have them almost off.
Yeah.
It's purely supplemental. It gives a tiny little bit extra overnight, so the basking spots and 80 degrees at night or something like that, because I have the AC running. But yeah, they get surprisingly hot. Yeah.
So that I mean, anything of like lack of data or whatever aside, just from maintaining the proper thermal gradient, that's one of the reasons why I don't use them.
Yeah. Now you use the LED lights, so obviously you see value in the day-night cycle.
Yeah, and it's a lot of it's for me too.
Sure.
The room's getting light in the day, so like they're experiencing light, but really it's just because I like to look at them, and it's easy to observe things, and when I'm feeding, it's nice to like know where that snake is that's shooting out at you.
Yeah.
But no, I would say that the LEDs they're mostly for me.
What you brought up them shooting out. How's their feed response? Are they pretty hard to get started? Do they take to rodents pretty quick?
They can be difficult. They're not the easiest. They're not the hardest. So like for instance, with the clutch that I just hatched out, three of the babies have eaten after 2 attempts, which is like good for what I've seen. If they absorb all of their yolk, they can maintain themselves for a long time without needing a meal, like 3 to 4 months without starting to lose weight. But I'm quick to force feed if I need to, because I feel like if you wait too long, their body gets so withered that they don't have the capacity to actually metabolize that meal properly if their system's been just like shut down for a while. Yeah. So if they're not eating, and it's pretty clear they're not eating, like they're not even showing interest, I'll intervene earlier. And then it just a point comes, I don't assist feed, I don't do the lodge it in the back of their mouth and sit there. I shove it down. The way that I see it, no matter what, that's a stressful experience for that snake. So let's be in and out as fast as we can. The goal is to get that meal into a snake that doesn't want to take it. And if I'm going to play God in that way, let's just get it over with. And I have a few now that I had to force feed they're perfect. They just have some catch up to do as far as growth goes. But just one day you'll open that tub and it'll turn its head and it'll flick its tongue and I'm like, oh, you're ready now. Give it a, heat up a little fuzzy mouse and boom, grabs it.
Yeah. So you're doing mice. Do you ever do quail or anything like that? Chickens?
I do quail as a last resort with baby scrub pythons. I don't like feeding them birds. I know people who do and people who do it successfully. I don't personally like it. I think that, I've experienced they don't grow in a way that I think is ideal with a bird diet. Like for instance, baby scrubs, I fed day-old quail side by side with the ones that are eating equivalent sized mice or African soft furs. Give them a few months. The one eating rodents will be twice the size of the one eating the birds, and the one eating the birds is hardly even grown. So to me, if I need to, I'll resort to quail before I resort to force feeding. But once they're eating the quail, the goal is to get them off that quail as soon as possible.
Does that create a whole nother problem then? Yeah,
it definitely does, but it's not as bad of a problem as the snake not eating at all. It's the way that I look at it. And eventually, for a while with the quail, I'll need to heat them up real hot, tease feed them a little bit. Eventually they're flying and grabbing that quail before they even can recognize what it is. That's usually the point where they'll take the rodent, where they're like, they'll eat anything now because they're not even waiting to see what it is before they take it. They smell foods in the room. They know the stuff's getting fed and they're ready to go.
So you're not selling any animals that aren't ready to go, right? When you sell them, they're eating.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. I'll sell. I have sold some, Kenneth, he got some Highlands for me, and I was like, hey, they're eating quail. They will, and they have since transitioned on to mice. But you might need to give them a few quail meals before they'll start eating mice. And so like I'll sell them that they're eating quail, but if not, non-feeding, absolutely not.
Yeah.
So and obviously, if something were to happen to those snakes that I'd sold them, take care of it. I'm not leaving you high and dry with snakes that, in hindsight, weren't ready to go. So
yeah. So for an adult animal, we're going to start them off in a tub, right? Just less stress, more safety for the animal.
Yeah, for me, more it's really just the ability to observe them. My friend Alexandra, who produces the Barneck Maruki crosses, she starts her babies in a planted 4x2x2 all cohab together.
Wow. And
they do great. So it works. I think one of the things that benefits her is that she has a much smaller collection than I do. But it just goes to show there isn't one answer to this question.
Yeah.
I start my babies in 6-quart tubs on paper towel. She puts hers in a planted 4x2x2 all together, and they both work. Obviously, with them being captive bred, produced at her house, in her enclosures at her house, that's probably why she's so successful. If you were to take a clutch of wild caught babies, or ones that were plucked out of a nest, and did that with them, you might not have as good of results. But then again, I've done neither, so I don't really know. But yeah, just 6-quart tub, water bowl, hide. Sometimes I'll use PVC, 3D printed perches for them if I have some that are not in use, and just keep them in there until they're like eating routinely. And then if I have available tubs to upgrade them, then I will. They're big when they hatch. They're long. They're deceptively long. They can coil up in this little tiny coil, but they're like 18 inches long.
Wow.
So there have been times where I'm like, I'll go through everybody. The way they're sitting in the tub, I'm like, okay, that's good. And then I take the snake out. I'm like, oh wow, you need an upgrade. This is not fair to you. So then I'll throw them in a bigger tub. But that little 6-quart tub, it's good because if I'm feeding them live prey, the prey can never be too far from them at any point in time.
What are the dimensions of a 6-quart tub?
Oh, like maybe 10, 11 inches by 5 by 3.5, something like that. Like the standard, like baby ball python tub.
Sure.
So yeah, typically I'll have them in there for, I would say, average 6 months, and then upgrade them to the 15-quart tub, which is just kind of like double the volume of the 6-quart tub, and move up until, if I the ones that I hold back, into the point where they go into like the 2x2x2 cages, and then continue to upgrade them as I have space and availability until they're in their adult cages.
So what would be a forever home for a Halmahara?
Like I have my biggest adults right now in 4x2x2s. As they grow, I might put them in some 5x2x2s or something like that I have. But most of them I think would do just fine in a 4x2x2 long term. You can go bigger though. That's the thing with these snakes. Once they're adults and they're solid, you can build giant enclosures for them. They're as long as you can find them and feed them, they're fine. But I'm kind of working on a semi-commercial type scale, so I have to make some concessions just for the sake of having the number of animals I do.
Sure. Yeah. And we appreciate your efforts. They're much needed. So getting back to the feeding, we've already touched a lot on the feeding, but so 1 to 2 or 0 to 2 years old, you're doing weekly feeding, and then from there you're pushing it out to every 2 weeks from typically, 2 on.
Yeah, usually until they're on the size where they can eat a large rat. Like they're from like when they're born until they can eat a small rat weekly. From the time they can eat a small rat until the time they can eat a large rat every other week. And then by the time they're on those large rats, usually like every 3 to 4 weeks, I push it out to.
Okay. And what are some potential health problems? I know you mentioned the skin blisters, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So as far as like non-viral problems, I would say, their skin is probably the most sensitive part about them. They can get RIs the same way any other snake can get an RI if they're cold and dry, cold and damp and yada, yada, yada. But I've experienced very, very few respiratory infections in scrub pythons, luckily. So that's typically not something I'm super concerned about.
Is that usually what brings it on, being cold and damp?
Yeah.
If you do see one?
For an extended period of time. Yeah, absolutely.
How cold is cold?
It really depends on how damp. But I would say, like, if they're, in the low 70s or below and damp for like multiple days at a time and they get an RI, wouldn't be shocked. With no supplemental heat.
Okay. So blisters if they're too wet, and an RI if they're too cold and wet.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it seems like they don't like to be too wet.
Yes. It's that balancing that humidity and hydration without dampness. That's kind of the name of the game with them.
How do they do with handling? How, like, is it, can they be handled too much? Does it stress them out in your opinion? Or once they're kind of there and confident, are they just kind of good to go?
I mean, I think you can say that for any snake. You can, if you pull that snake out every day, yeah, probably is going to be stressed out. But I mean, I handle most of my snakes weekly, and they're fine with it. There's nothing that I would say indicates any sort of level of stress with most of them. Some of like the wild caught animals that I got when they were bigger, they're never going to like it, but unfortunately they kind of have to come out for me to clean them. But ones that are tolerant of it, I mean, theoretically you could, handle that snake multiple times a week. Like if it was at like a place like the Reptarium, where this is an educational center where kids are coming in, they're interacting with animals. I think a captive bred scrub python would do just fine in a scenario like that, but it has to be the right animal that is tolerant and whatnot of that type of interaction, which a lot of them are, but certain ones aren't. And if you have one that isn't, then you got to adjust that accordingly.
Right on. All right. Well, I think that kind of wraps up the care guide. Anything else you want to add to it, or I think we covered everything? Feeding.
I mean, honestly,
housing?
it's really straightforward. They're hardy snakes. I definitely want to emphasize that. If you're a degree or two off, or 10% off on humidity, or okay, this is like general parameters, and if you can hit somewhere within these numbers, you're probably going to be fine. A lot of historically what was seen as like proper or improper husbandry, like if you are outside of these parameters, this is what's going to happen, is because those were pythons that had nidovirus, where if you didn't have those parameters right, they're going to develop their RIs from the virus will be able to build in their system. They won't be able to suppress it, and now that's when they get the respiratory infections. So I guess this is the care parameter for a non-nidovirus python. That's a different story, because all of these snakes are super hardy when they don't have a taxed immune system.
Right on. So it seems like it'd be better off if you had to go in one direction or the other. It'd be better off that they're too dry than too wet. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, too dry, they're going to have maybe a bad shed.
Yeah, you're going to supplement with some soaks or whatever.
Yeah. What do you think about soaking? Do you soak ever, or is it just if it's needed?
No, really if when it's needed. If I have a bad shed is really the only time I'll soak, or like I've soaked some of my gravid females just to try to get them a little extra hydration with how dry it is out here. But like back in the Midwest, I never did that. So really as needed basis.
Okay. Do you recommend somebody soak an animal after getting it in the mail, after it goes through FedEx and everything, to hydrate?
I don't see a problem with it. I haven't really done that historically. Okay. If it looks super dry, if it has a bad shed, if it seems dehydrated, I mean, but think about it. 16 hours. If you 16 hours in a box, 16 hours without a water bowl in a cage, obviously that's it's being shipped, but like that's not a long period of time. It wasn't exported to a different country. But then again, definitely can't hurt.
Okay.
I know people swear by it, and I haven't always done it, and I think both work depending on how the animal is doing. Yeah,
I pretty much don't soak unless I feel like it's needed, so if there's some shed left behind or something like that, or if they look kind of dried out, I don't really see the point.
Right.
What's your favorite snake of all time? Doesn't have to be something it could be something you can't even get. Actually, I prefer it if it was. I have a feeling it's going to be a scrub python though.
Yeah, I mean, kind of boring answer. Barneck scrub python. But if I had to pick a snake that I can't get as the coolest snake, That's difficult. I would say just from a look standpoint, I'll go with the royal tree snake, Gonyosoma margaritatum. They're like a red-tailed green rat snake, except like they look like stained glass. Should look that up after the show.
I will.
For anyone who knows what those snakes are, you know what I'm talking about. For anyone who doesn't, kind of like take like a red-tailed green rat and like a Mexican tiger rat snake, and then like a mosaic stained glass from like a church or something, and make it a snake. They're absolutely freaking gorgeous. From a rarity standpoint, I'd say Bismarck scrub python, just because there's only a couple pictures of those that even exist in the world, and that's a snake that will never see captivity.
Yeah.
I hardly even know what they fully look like. I've seen some grainy, weird pictures on like iNaturalist of them. But they kind of look like a Cuban boa and a scrub python had a baby. They're
Wow.
weird. They're not like the most brilliant color pattern wise, but just the fact that they're in this, in this faraway land we can't really get to is just makes them kind of like that white whale.
Yeah.
And then I guess a third one that you asked for one, but I'll give you a third, are the Western Australian olive pythons, the Liasis baroni, that are allegedly get like 18 feet long, but look like olive pythons. They don't exist in captivity. When Ryan Young was on my show, he told me about seeing one in the wild that was a juvenile. But that second to seeing scrub pythons in Australia, that would be like the number 2 thing I'd want to see in Australia, would be the Western olive pythons.
Yeah. Do you have any carpet pythons?
I have it's a gelatin jungle that Brandon Wheeler was kind enough to give to me. I had carpets in the past. I bred inland carpets. I had some coastals, and I've worked with diamond pythons as well.
Nice. All awesome stuff. I'd love to get some inlands.
They're my favorite of the carpet complex. They're incredible. That's another snake that like I have very few snakes or even reptiles in general that I've had before, don't have now, and would get again. They're on that short list.
Yeah.
They
seem so chill.
They're super chill. They're small. They're beautiful. I think they're like one of what should be like the best pet snakes, because my like adult male was 4 foot and my adult female was 5 foot, and like the girth of a medium rat.
Why do you think they're not in the hobby more?
I think they're just the founder stock probably wasn't the biggest in the US. And then, there's a few clutches produced a year. I think a lot of the, not to like sound negative, I think a lot of the carpet python world has not done the best job of advertising to the casual reptile fan. They do a great job of promoting amongst each other, but of bringing in new people, I don't think they always are. They're not hitting the platforms where new keepers exist. I think with carpet pythons in particular, aside from how they're marketed, I don't know. I've always loved like the axanthic looking snakes, but it's hard to put a super high end line bred jungle carpet and an inland carpet side by side, and to a new keeper, they're gonna be direct. They're gonna look at that jungle carpet first.
Yeah.
Or like a diamond jungle jag or something like that, or some of the more designer stuff.
Yeah, I'm working on my 2.2 of jungles. I just love them.
Yeah, they're great. No, I love jungles too. My only carpet python is a jungle.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I definitely. I just think inland from a physiological standpoint check all the boxes for a good pet snake.
Yeah. Yeah, they're so out there and so different. I think I'm actually going to be covering those with Roy Stewart. I think next weekend we're going to be talking about inlands. So I'm excited about that.
Oh yeah.
So where can people find you? I mean, you got your podcast.
Yeah. It's on the Trap Talk Reptile Network. You can either see it on YouTube or Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all that stuff. Kush's Korner is what it's called. It's every Wednesday night at 9 Eastern time, 7 Mountain time where I'm at. And you can see all like the backlog of the episodes is on YouTube and, you know, streaming services. And then other than that, it's just Instagram at ScrubShepherd. If you can see that on the screen right now, it's
yeah, it's a good idea. It's a good
and
idea
then
having that on there.
just Steven Kush on Facebook as well.
Heck yeah, man. Well, you're doing awesome stuff, especially for your age. It's incredible. And love the podcast.
Oh yeah.
Keep it up.
I'll do my best.
All right. Thanks, man. Thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you.